Upon hearing the phrase Tenkaichi, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you? Is it a specific game, or perhaps a defining feature of the series? Or do you think of its massive, all-encompassing character roster from the third game? Or maybe it's those controller-breaking moments with beam struggles. Whatever aspects of this gaming series many might be fond of, did you ever wonder about how this series came to be? Nowadays, claiming that the Tenkaichi games are great isn't exactly a controversial opinion, but at the time of their release, going from a series that looks like this and designing a new series to look like this was an adjustment, to say the least. And how did we go from such a rudimentary game like this one to a refined and dynamic experience of the third installment? While you may remember many of your favorite characters in these games, the meticulous details or hidden Easter eggs, have you ever thought about the people behind these games and all of the work that they had to do in order to turn this vision into reality? What did they want the player to experience that they couldn't get anywhere else? And what features or ideas did they make but never fully implement? And how has this series impacted the Dragonball community? And what's the story outside of the game? In order to find out, we're going to have to go back to the past. The year of 2004, a much simpler time. Greece were hosting the Olympics, YouTube had yet to be founded, and MySpace was the biggest website in the social media space, with Zuck only just launching the Facebook. And one of the most outrageous things in the political space was this guy's scream. And if you were growing up around that time, the pinnacle of wealth was owning one of these guys. But if you didn't have the money to spend on an iPod with a color screen, at least you could still go to the cinema, where there was banger after banger after banger. And like God intended, Shrek 2 was the highest grossing film of that year. We were also graced by Mean Girls.
And shove it right up your hair.
It doesn't even go here.
That is so fetch. Gretchen, stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
Speaking of things that are fetch, video games. This was one of the best years to be a gamer in. It was marked with some pretty popular installments to already well-received gaming franchises, and also we were introduced to new ones. And if all of this wasn't enough to keep gamers busy, it was also the year marked with some legendary launches like the PSP and Nintendo DS. With so much innovation and well-received games, it's quite hard to even be remembered in this year. But on the 16th of November, the world was about to be introduced to an absolute classic, Half-Life 2, but also Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3. The Budokai series of games on the PS2 had finally hit its stride with its third installment. The quality of this game made it an absolute classic and was a much needed breath of fresh air at the time, particularly in relation to other games based on the franchise.
If you purchase Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Battle 22, then you're part of the problem.
$20 is $40 too much for Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Battle 22. Yeah, that game's still crap.
Yeah, that game still makes me want to kill myself.
Don't play it. If you're a Dragon Ball Z fan, don't play it. Go play Budokai. It's so much better.
Just say no to ass games. Don't let them do this to us, please.
While the previous installments of the Budokai series were not hated with such a level of vengeance, they only really resonated if you were a fan of the anime. But Budokai 3 was a different beast, garnering admiration from wider gaming circles and critics alike. The game was so successful it would later go on to go platinum on the PS2, and it outsold Jak 3 Burnout, Tony Hawk 2, and it came pretty close to beating out Spider-Man and Star Wars Battlefront. You might be thinking, why? This game had insane replay value that kept people coming back for more in its Dragon Universe mode, trying to explore characters' stories and level up and enhance their abilities. With the goal of unlocking a plethora of hidden characters, costumes, special abilities and ultimate moves throughout hours of fights, world exploration, and additional objectives and secret encounters. And if this wasn't enough, there was other modes like World Tournament, Dueling, and Dragon Arena. Its mechanics have been sharpened in relation to the first two games, having a special focus on dynamic moves, an interesting combat system with cancels, and the ability to bring in items and boost your character. And comparing it to other games at the time, for a game to be marketed like this,
the power of the Saiyan Overdrive fighting system gives you more bone-crunching attacks. Dragon Ball Z, Budokai 3.
certainly made people pretty excited. This game was a 1-2 punch. It had a lot of mechanics, a lot of modes, and a lot of things to do that just made it a very fun game. But also, its fan service, dedication to its characters, its world, flashy ultimates made it a very fun Dragon Ball game. This game skewed positively, and to this day there are still some fans claiming it's the best Dragon Ball game of all time. And while this game isn't quite technical enough to be considered a traditional 3D fighting game like Tekken, for some players, utilizing the cancel system allowed for much more dynamic combos and interesting battle sequences, and it certainly didn't stop some people from trying to rate this game like a fighting game. And quite interestingly, this game sits under the umbrella of anime games, and up until this point, games based off famous anime weren't exactly seen very positively by the gaming circles, so to finally have a great one not only made it more interesting for wider gamers, but it also gave anime games something to look up to.
This is a must-have for Dragon Ball Z fans, and the action is also fast-paced and viscerally satisfying that it can genuinely appeal to those completely uninterested in Dragon Ball Z.
So with a very positive reception, great commercial success, happy Dragon Ball fans, and an interesting game to play, why the need to change to another style of game? At the time, a then Bandai, prior to being acquired and undergoing several name changes, held the interactive rights to the Dragon Ball IP. They allowed other companies to sub-license these rights from them. In the early 2000s, Atari's parent company, Infogrames, struck a deal with Bandai in order to secure these sub-licensing rights, and eventually Atari itself acquired the rights to produce and release Dragon Ball games in the international markets up until January of 2010. This deal did not come cheaply. Atari had to fork over $10 million to secure this license. While in today's landscape, this deal seems like a complete steal, being as how the video game segment to this franchise alone is worth billions. However, at this point in time, the Dragon Ball interactive rights were not particularly noteworthy, and while games developed by other studios for Bandai did show improvement, they still weren't revolutionary either. But for Atari, their investment paid off almost immediately. Their own produced Dragon Ball game not only elevated the bar for what fans could expect from the series, but it was also a complete goldmine for Atari, with 1 year in particular seeing Dragon Ball games account for nearly 50% of Atari's revenue, with an astounding 85 million in sales. And this success was not a fluke either. Dragon Ball consistently remained a high-performing licensed property in Atari's portfolio. With the sub-licensing rights in hand, Atari also had the flexibility to go external or internal to make their Dragon Ball games. They also had an established commercial success with this IP now, and had a growing player base. However, there was a looming deadline for them. The license would eventually return back to Bandai in 2010, and being as how Atari paid pennies for someone else's rights and turned it into a money-making machine, there was no way that Bandai would ever reconsider giving anyone their license again. And with other companies wanting a slice of the cake, Atari had to spend millions defending the license during this time. All of this together created a very strong incentive for Atari to keep developing and launching as many Dragon Ball games as possible. Yet this urgency made their decision to discontinue the Budokai series completely baffling to gamers at the time. With everything that Atari had launched around this franchise, the Budokai series was by far its most successful. Further adding to this decision, they also chose to not continue their partnership with DIMS, the developer responsible for creating these titles.
What?
The game's series producer for the Budokai titles was Daisuke Uchiyama. This guy was pretty important, and he would later go on to be president and CEO of Bandai Namco Studios. He noted years later as to why he didn't make Budokai 4. "I have my own policy for gaming series. Create the first from scratch, evolve the second, complete the series by the third, and don't make a fourth. The reason I have it like that is because if I make a fourth, then the series will never end. And that's why I wanted to end the Budokai series with a bang with Budokai 3. But for gamers in 2004, without any of this knowledge, many speculated as to why they didn't continue with the series. If Atari were comfortable greenlighting many games at once, why not have a sequel to their best series? Despite the success of them, the total units sold by each Budokai installment was slowly dropping over time, so maybe a shakeup was needed. It's possible that their competitors and what they were doing with anime games at the time, new technical opportunities with the PS2 Slim, and of course Japan's disdain for the number 4, might have pushed them to explore something new. What can be said about Dragon Ball Z sagas that hasn't already been said? It's honestly one of the biggest pieces of dog shit. And don't just take my word for it. How bad do you think a game has to be in order for a gaming outlet to say this? Thankfully, later on in that year, the scene would be hit with a style of Dragon Ball game that had never been done before. While Uchiyama was done with his vision of what a great Dragon Ball game could be, as fate would have it, he would have a conversation with someone junior in his team after completing Budokai 3 that they should just make a new style of Dragon Ball game, and the person he said that to was Ryo Mito. While he would later go on to be a game series producer for many Dragon Ball games and other anime franchises, at this time he very much wanted to prove that he could add something to the gaming scene. And the game he ended up making over the course of that year was Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi. The name might have been a soft reference to the tournament in the manga, which is referred to as Tenkaichi Budokai, which roughly translates to Strongest Under the Heavens Martial Arts Tournament. While this naming convention doesn't really make too much sense, as the name is clearly just a flipped version of what it probably just should be, this was likely more done to further capitalize on the Budokai brand being so popular in Western markets, and potentially distance itself from other games at the time. While this naming scheme definitely brought it closer to what Western gamers already liked, it didn't stop it from being confused as a soft continuation of the series for years to come. This naming scheme put further distance from what it was referred to in Japan. The Budokai label doesn't even exist there, and those games are just referred to as Dragon Ball Z, and then 2 and 3 for the sequels. God, they love saying the number 3, don't they? So due to this, the Budokai Tenkaichi label doesn't exist in Japan entirely, and this new game was referred to as Dragon Ball Z Sparking. But what was the intent of this name, and where did it come from? Ryo would later comment in the 30th anniversary Dragon Ball Shōzitsu Super History book that the game was originally going to be called Super Senshi Gekitoden, but the team were a bit worried that it would be confused for other games that had come out in the past, and they wanted this one to be very different. While looking for other sources of inspiration, they eventually turned to the anime. Its memorable opening theme song, Head Shala, is sang by Hironobu Kageyama, and towards the end of it, he shouts. The team felt that this was pretty memorable, so the team renamed their series accordingly. And many years later, when the next Tenkaichi or Sparking game was going to be announced, Mr. Kageyama took to the stage at Battle Hour and performed many of his memorable songs from the show, with the last one being Head Shala, with a special emphasis on sparking, with camera angles and graphics.
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
But deep cuts aside, back to 2005. So what if it's called Sparking? Why does that matter? And why does this motif result in a better game? In the original Budokai games, Uchiyama had an incredibly strong vision. He had a deep respect for the show. He strived to make it as close to the anime as possible. By giving fans the best of both worlds, reciting the original story, and creating new what-if scenarios was really important to him. He noted, at the time, we had to prepare a huge stack of presentation materials regarding how he wanted to interpret the events of Dragon Ball Z. His vision pushed him to pull favors from senior staff in order to get the Japanese cast to do voice work for the game, which wasn't exactly common at the time. His dedication to replicating scenarios to a T and making it pay homage to the anime as much as possible really drove a lot of his decision making. Making characters appear as accurate as possible given the technology at the time wasn't exactly easy, and the game was even delayed a year to meet this vision and stakeholder approval. For a games producer to say, "I put my heart and soul to complete the Budokai series with improved game design, art direction, shading and volume, and finishing it with a bang so it doesn't end up being stale," is a clear sign of strong vision. So for the then newly appointed games producer Ryo, taking over the mantle of mainline Dragon Ball games, of which are doing well financially, and having a clear quality bar of what those games would be compared to, all eyes were on Ryo to come up with a really strong vision. The strong differentiator that he came up with, which would power his vision, came after revisiting the anime. Ryo would comment, "Since the Dragon Ball Z series had already perfected 2D battles, we tried moving into a 3D space. And to me, that's what's cool about Dragon Ball battles. It's being able to kick your opponent into the distance, pursue them with frantic speed, knocking him down, and then firing off a Kamehameha." Being really particular about that is what led us to come up with the Dragon Ball Z sparking system. The direction of 3D dynamic battles was a novel idea, and while the genre of anime arena fighters is commonplace nowadays, back then the concept of one-on-one fights with full 3D style controls that enabled the player to explore the environment wasn't exactly common, with many games dabbling in some aspects but not all. One-on-one fighters tended to be straight up 2D in terms of movement like Street Fighter, or have 3D elements that allow for more movement but is somewhat constricted to a 2D plane, like Soul Calibur or the Budokai games. Even games that attempted to break convention, like the Naruto Ultimate Ninja series, had multiple 2D planes within a 3D environment, but it's still really 2D movement. And while there were definitely some games that had 3D controls, they were somewhat more akin to party games, supporting many players at once. Interestingly, games with 3D battles did exist, but only really in the arcades with novel controls. Some games featured ranged combat and using the environment to your advantage, using it to dodge and hide from your opponent. A game called Virtual On would very much feature also having melee options on top of standard ranged combat, and it would have a lot more movement options that further utilized the environment and medium. So Ryo's vision of having 3D fights in a console-like experience was certainly a novel one, and what was his plan on making that happen? By choosing to drop developer dimps. You know how much I sacrifice? This allowed the team to look elsewhere and perhaps choose a set of people that were comfortable innovating. The team over at Spike had very much developed and localized a number of games across different genres. Horror-style 2D adventures, games with semi-open worlds, hack and slashers, and racing and football games all really helped show that this developer had range. And even partnering with other publishers like Capcom and developing a game like Crimson Tears certainly made them a candidate to not only develop a game well, but also work effectively with Atari and Bandai. Likely, the final bit of reassurance that Ryo and his team needed was that Spike had created a game called King of the Colosseum. While this 3D wrestling game looks rather tame, it actually pulled from many of the Japanese wrestling leagues on the TV at the time, and it was really well received in Japan. Its most prominent feature is that it had a really large list of characters that had to pay close homage to how they appeared like within the league itself. Their costumes, their face, some of the mannerisms of how they move and act, all had to be replicated with a lot of care. This developer was likely a perfect storm for Rio. They had a lot of range when making games, proven track record of working with other publishers, but most importantly, they could very much handle a big Japanese IP that featured bombastic characters in a 3D space, and very much honor its source material. Wanting to bring his sparking vision to life, Rio likely felt that developer Spike could inject something new into the franchise and deliver on it. So with a strong new vision and now being equipped by a very promising development team, Dragon Ball fans would perceive glimpses of what was to come. While details were initially quite vague, even leading to some gaming journalists mistaking this as a sequel to Budokai 3. There were still though some very fascinating tidbits emerging from early leaks. These included shots of full-scale environments, novel UI elements, and artwork that prominently featured battle-damaged characters, hinting at dynamic character models and a perspective shift not really commonly seen in many games. This was eyebrow-raising for fans of the franchise that browsed the web in the mid-2000s. While it's hard to imagine in today's landscape of Dragon Ball games, at this point in time, many characters from the franchise had yet to make their debut in a video game. So for fans at the time, going through leaks and discovering that Janemba would now be playable was certainly exciting. And as more commercials were revealed closer to the game's launch date, it became increasingly apparent to gamers that this game would be a significant departure from what had come before.
Looking for a fight? How about a beating?
Real 360-degree environment. Fight in the air, land, or sea. Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 360 degrees of hurt. Available for PlayStation 2 computer entertainment system.
360 degrees of hurt. Well, I'm sure Johnny Cash would have loved a tagline like that. But what did this mean for Dragon Ball fans? This game was a true 3D fighter and was a refreshing take on the genre. Players were immersed in an expansive 3D environment where movement in every direction wasn't just only possible, but helpful from a combat perspective. Reflecting the incredible speed and flight capabilities of characters from the show, this game allowed the players to experiment with these mechanics, which oddly created a sense of freedom in a fighting game. With a novel lock-on system more akin to arcade shooters, players could either move in relation to their opponent or switch to free movement controls. The camera perspective shifted massively to a behind-the-back style view, keeping all the action in frame regardless of player distance. At the start of each match, players were not automatically locked onto their opponent. This design choice encouraged a degree of exploration before engaging in combat. Further adding to this dynamic was the variation of spawning locations, which changed depending on which character you selected. This, combined with the fact that arenas themselves were large in size and had a destructible component to them, looking for your opponent before they could find you could be rather tense. And with certain moves, particularly powerful ones, disabling a player's lock-on, this further made the environment more of an integral part of the gameplay. This search and destroy component to the game arguably made the battlefields a character within themselves. The changes to movement allowed the player to attack their enemy from a number of different angles and even smash them into different directions. So while close quarters combat very much had a shake-up, the changes to ranged combat in particular really offered something unique for the time. Having arcade-style shootouts from afar was now a real option, and depending on the battlefield and what kind of cover it provided, offered different ways to play. Do you dash into your opponent and attack them up close? Do you break your opponent's lock-on and surprise attack them? Do you hide behind the environment and shoot key blasts from far away? Do you run away, power up, and fire special moves at your opponent? Do you destroy the environment, leaving them nowhere to hide? Do you find a way to flank your opponent as you do increased damage from the back? Or do you close the distance with a new rush style move which couldn't be blocked and very much put the fear of God into your opponent? With so many different options to change the distance between you and your opponent, attack them from up close or far away, or very much use the environment to your advantage, this resulted in the player very much fighting in land, sky, or sea. Keeping players busy was a very expansive story mode in Z Battlegate, guarded by the now infamous Mr. Popo. All battles began with a short cutscene which were fully voiced, and depending if you win or lost, you would very much be greeted by a very different cutscene. And for the big events within the story mode, some of these cutscenes could be much more elaborate. These missions had a combination of defeating your opponent under many varying conditions, including surviving against them and using the environment to hide for a certain time frame. And quite interestingly, after completing the normal sagas and even some of the movies, the player began unlocking what-if scenarios and playing the sagas but from the villain's point of view, which led to some really interesting fights. While it was fun to see what certain characters would say and behave like had they won certain fights that they ended up losing in the show, if the player completes all of the fights within this Z-Gate, they get to see what the villain would do if all of their opponents were defeated, and some of them were pretty funny. Cell not being able to fathom that Android 17 fusing with himself makes him a much stronger and ultimate android is very entertaining to watch.
I can't believe I was beaten by 17! There's nothing perfect about it.
And all of this is very much on top of normal what-if scenarios, like if the Saiyans defeated Frieza, or if all of the villains teamed up and killed off the heroes one by one. While Z Battlegate certainly had a lot of fights and interesting surprises, making a return was classic modes like Dueling and World Tournament, and a new mode called Ultimate Battle. No, not that one. This featured a 100 fight gauntlet in order to be crowned number 1. This grueling tower included secret encounters, having to prevent people from stealing your place, and even be offered a really hard fight for sometimes skipping places ahead of you, but risk dropping many places if you lose. So with all of this new content and the game's vision of having 3D fights, it really did start to feel more like the show. The sparking direction also found its way into other aspects of the game. When you charged your key to the max, your HUD actually gets sparking animations to it. The sparking motif would even be further emphasized by the fact that once the player is in this mode, their character gets access to their ultimate finishing move. Perhaps this is a reference to the opening of the show, as when sparking is mentioned, it looks like Goku is about to unleash a spirit bomb, and within the game, this is very much his ultimate attack while in sparking. As you're watching this, you might be thinking to yourself, this game looks really clunky, the graphics don't look great, the fighting system looks underdeveloped by today's standard. So why did players like it back then? Relativity. At the time, Dragon Ball fans weren't exactly spoiled for choice like they are today. Most games tended to be, well, they would elicit reactions like this.
That game still makes me want to kill myself.
So most Dragon Ball games weren't the best. And the great ones were certainly an exception. So for a game to be as good as Budokai 3 at the time, it was actually a lot of work for developers. Games had to be launched pretty much every year for the Dragon Ball IP, so this meant that some games were underdeveloped at launch, while some took multiple installments before they were great. Tenkaichi 1 on the other hand launched at a really strong starting point. Despite being the first installment, the graphical presentation, the amount of characters, stages, and dynamic special moves were comparable to games with multiple installments. And there was aspects to the gameplay that you couldn't experience anywhere else. You could fly anywhere, find Dragon Balls on the map, you're expected to find your opponent like you do in the show. Special attacks that involved rushes were much more common, with unique cutscenes that hadn't really been done before. And Dragon Ball's phenomenal world design almost became a killer feature within a game like this one, with a clear focus on battle arenas. The inclusion of giant characters which weren't exactly common at the time. And while you had to look for it, some of the nuanced details in the show definitely trickled in to how some of the characters work. Vegeta could fire ki blasts at a much higher velocity compared to everyone else. Captain Ginyu's body swap actually works, and Gogeta Super Saiyan 4 does the most damage in the game, reflecting the lore at the time. Some of these aspects made it feel more like a Dragon Ball game than some that had come before it. And while this game would go on to be defined as an arena fighter, at the time where that term wasn't as common, it was seen as rather innovative, blending many aspects of games together. 1 part Power Stone inspired environments, 2 part Japanese arcade style shooters, 3 part traditional DBZ fighting game, and a sprinkle of Japanese wrestling thrown in really made this game feel quite novel. Other innovations included having a split-screen style multiplayer. This pattern was only really used in racing games and shooting games. So for something dubbing itself as a fighting game, having mechanics like this was really unique, and it really forced the players to explore the environment and not be tethered by one camera containing everything. A large component as to what makes an anime game successful, or any game based on a popular IP, is how accurate the game is in relation to its source material, and what the gameplay does to enhance the feelings of that story. Because if you don't, you can sometimes end up with tonal whiplash.
Genji 2 is an action game which is based on Japanese history. Famous battles which actually took place in ancient Japan. So here's this giant enemy crab.
In order for a game based on a popular IP to not include enemy crabs, starting to understand the source material is a great start. What set of elements made it really popular? What audience is it for? What audience is it not for? What was the intent behind its creation? And what are the aspects that make it unique or different from its competitors? Dragon Ball, with its global appeal and deep-rooted presence within pop culture, resonates with fans for diverse reasons that can vary based on region, age, and personal interest. Factors that set this franchise apart are its memorable characters with novel, iconic designs, its over-the-top battle sequences, ridiculous and fantastical abilities, and really rich world building. These elements are underpinned by themes of self-improvement, adventure, and never giving up. Being written by an author that was inspired by both Eastern and Western stories, it covers a variety of different subgenres. So for Dragon Ball games, it normally entails being able to play as many characters as possible, getting to use their special moves and transformations. Is there a meaningful progression system where you can level up your characters? Do the graphics resemble the art style of either the anime or the manga? And are the sound effects similar to Dragon Ball battle sounds?
I'm ready now. That's good to hear.
And do the cast from the show return to dub their characters? Do the environments look like the worlds depicted within the show? If there's fights, they have to feel exciting and dynamic. And do the games have a sense of adventure? And all of this is on top of a game just being a fun game to play. For Rio and the team at Spike, they clearly had met many of this criteria, and in some places completely exceeded fan expectation. Its vision had pushed the team to set a standard for 3D Dragon Ball battles in video games. Innovating in this way and actually committing to it isn't exactly easy, but it's quite apparent that the team were really trying to make this game stand out.
Hi there, my name is Donnie Clay, and I'm the producer on Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi. On this game, we wanted to really focus on the freedom of flight that the Dragon Ball Z universe has to offer. Wanted to be able to create some distance in large expanses of arenas, make them fully destructible, really just make the game feel like you're in Dragon Ball Z and you can do whatever you want to do.
While Dragon Ball games are undeniably made for fans of the franchise, game reviewers with a passing knowledge of the show did note how novel its gameplay mechanics were.
Atari's done a great job year after year of making its Dragon Ball Z games a lot better than the year before, and the latest one, Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi, is no exception. And this one's now by Spike, and they've kind of come from an action background rather than fighting. And it really kind of shows in the way the gameplay works. This is a true 3D fighting game where you move around completely destructible 3D environments. You can fly on your own now without having to worry about being launched like you had to in the past. And you can really kind of use the environment to your advantage. So the brand new design really lends itself well to the Dragon Ball Z fighting style.
The deeper players dove into this game, the more evident it became that Rio and the team were determined to go above and beyond for what was common at the time. This was one of the first games to include both an English and Japanese voice cast. While games up until this point were dubbed in multiple languages, they were region locked, but this game sought to change that to better connect players to whatever anime experience they had. Upon analysing the game and looking at some of its design choices, it further highlights deliberate effort to create something fundamentally different. Taking an aspect like the characters and comparing it back to Budokai 3, certainly show some of these differences. Budokai 3's full roster is around 44 unique playable characters, and that's including the exclusive Japanese content. You can add an additional 4 characters if you account for costumes changing one character into another one. For example, Piccolo has a nail costume and Videl has a Bulma costume. And once you include the iconic transformations to this list, that's an extra 40 characters. For transparency, a character like Vegeta would be counted as one unique character in his base form, but then he would get an additional 4 transformations as a Super Saiyan 1, 2, 4, and then Majin. And then his fusion forms like Gogeta, Vegito, and Viku all count as unique characters with their own transformations. And let's just count Cell and Boo's absorptions as transformations for this. So Budokai 3's full roster is pretty great. But in comparison, Tenkaichi 1's roster is really strong considering that it's the first entry within its series. This game had 49 unique playable characters, and then an additional 41 transformations. While that game itself has every form as a different character, if we use the same rules to compare them, you can see why BT1's roster is pretty great. And in relation to Budokai 3, there were some characters in Tenkaichi 1 that made their debut. Master Roshi, Baby Vegeta, Super 17, no, not that one. Not yet. An additional effort went into giving players the chance to use characters with really rare appearances, like Chiaotzu or the heavily advertised all members of the Ginyu Force. Rio would later note, over the course of the last 3 Dragon Ball Z games, the character roster kept on increasing with each subsequent game, so if it suddenly decreased with a new series, you'd be disappointed, wouldn't you? Good lord, he's a prophet, isn't he? And while there was new characters in the game, the way that they worked in relation to the old games was quite different. The Tenkaichi games reintroduced the shift of not having forms tied to items, not being able to be hit out of your form when you're low on ki. So if you pick Super Saiyan 3 Goku, you're going to play as Super Saiyan 3 Goku and nothing is going to stop you. Next up is character balancing, and comparing the two, you can notice quite the difference. Taking a popular character like Vegeta, he had many special moves and even multiple ultimates, and this is on top of having many transformations. He's clearly well equipped to prove that he's better than Kakarot. But if you're someone who prefers dunking him instead, it might be an uphill battle, as Android 16 only has one special move and one ultimate. You might be thinking, well hang on a minute, Android 16 isn't a popular character, he was only in one saga and didn't come back, whereas Vegeta was there for a really large portion of Z. Wherever you might sit on this, one character simply has more gameplay options than the other one, but in Tenkaichi 1, they attempted to address this. All characters got 2 utility moves, 2 special moves, and 1 ultimate move, so regardless of how much exposure a character had within the story, they could still play well in this game, and you didn't feel like you were at a disadvantage unless you picked one of the main characters. There is a fair argument that in Tenkaichi 1, a lot of the characters' moves are very copy and paste. But in Budokai 3, a character like Kid Trunks for instance, doesn't even have an ultimate, so the choice of giving everybody something is still better than some people getting nothing at all. The next difference was character types, and this really made the game feel a lot more interesting to play. Some characters took aspects for what they were like within the show. Saiyan characters tended to have higher powered super moves compared to the rest of the cast, and their ultimate moves while in sparking were particularly damaging. Humans tended to have much higher ki control, and they had much faster flight and movement speeds. Videl literally is the fastest character in this game. Within the show, the Z fighters had the ability to sense ki energy and track their opponents. And within this game, it resulted in their radar being slightly better than everybody else's. If their opponent had charged more than 50% of their ki, they would show up as a blip on their radar, meaning that you could see them even if you weren't locked on. The Majin's regeneration factor came in the form of them being able to heal within this game. Giant characters literally have an absurd amount of health by quite the margin. They don't flinch when being hit, and rush attacks don't work on them. Interestingly, some non-giant characters that do have large builds also possess a similar type of super armor, While they can still be affected by rush moves, these characters present a unique challenge by forcing the player to rethink their approach to close quarters combat. But the most novel use of character lore affecting gameplay was how the androids or cyborgs work. Within the show, androids 17 and 18 have an eternal energy reactor, which, like the name suggests, gives them infinite energy. So within the game, it resulted in them two starting each round with a full ki gauge, which other characters couldn't, and they could very much auto-charge ki over time, even when blocking or doing nothing, which was an insane advantage. Their charge button only worked when attempting to go into sparking. And for androids 19 and 20 on the other hand, they were the energy absorption model, so while they also couldn't charge ki, they could convert other people's ki blasts into energy. And they also gained a lot more ki by just attacking their opponent compared to other characters within this game. Within the show, the androids are artificial and they don't have a true ki signature due to them not being natural, so the Z fighters couldn't actually sense them.
How are we supposed to find these androids if we can't even sense where they are?
Well, if we can't sense their power levels, we'll just have to find them the old-fashioned way, with our eyes.
And in the game, this very much holds true. Even if the android's ki gauge is over 50%, if a character has ki sensing abilities, it just doesn't work on the androids. Characters that needed scouters needed extra time before they can lock on to their opponent, and while they could sense power blips, if they took too much damage and their scouter breaks, you're back to searching for things manually. These intricacies enabled the player who had knowledge of the lore to have slight gameplay advantages, while the Budokai characters played a lot more similarly. But by far, one of the best innovations was to its progression system. Budokai 3's system, while expansive and great, had two main issues. The first one being is that you had to unlock all of your special moves for a character, either through its adventure mode or through buying it in a shop. Loading the game for the first time and selecting the main character, you can't even use his most iconic special move. And while some special moves were relatively easy to attain, others required a lot of time, effort and zenny to unlock. And the second issue, and by far the largest, is how your character's customization is managed. The player could do one of three things: give their character a stat boost or have special effects through equipment, bring an item into battle like a sensu bean, or most likely, give your character special abilities. All of this was managed with one tray that could only hold 7 slots. While they likely did this for balance and making your character play the way you want, in practice this presented some challenges. The abilities category held all transformations, super moves and ultimates in the game. With such a constraint for space to not hit the item limit, this forced the player to pick between them. Do you want to transform all the way to Super Saiyan 4, or do you want access to all of Goku's special moves that will actually do a lot of damage? This would be like playing a Spider-Man game, and they forced you to pick between having spider sense or being able to shoot webs. There was a way to avoid this painful situation, and that was with a breakthrough capsule. This special capsule allowed the player to equip all of their transformations, special moves and ultimates in the game and ignore the item limit. Here is how you attain them. Firstly, go into Dragon Universe, select a character, and throughout your play find 7 secret locations to the Dragon Balls. These are normally divided up into chapters, so if you miss one, you have to do another playthrough. Before the story mode for that character is about to end, of which isn't obvious to the player, summon Shenron and wish for their breakthrough capsules, and now do this for every character in the Dragon Universe mode. Secondly, make sure one of your characters is at least level 30 so they can find a secret location and acquire a black membership card. Thirdly, you have to unlock every character in the game, and yes, all of them are unlocked differently. Fourthly, you need to buy every ultimate move in the game from the Baba shop. Being so they only show one at a time upon entering said shop, you have to exit and enter that thing a numerous amount of times until the right capsules load. And this assumes you have enough Zenny, which you probably don't, so have fun winning World Tournament over and over, while refraining from buying transformations and special moves. Fifthly, after buying all of that, you now unlock the ability to buy Baba Crystals. For some reason, they're hidden within the shop under systems, and they're also one of the most expensive things you can buy. After doing this, you will unlock the ability to buy breakthrough capsules for every character, of which are incredibly expensive.
I just can't do it. I can't. this shit no more, man.
The only person who could have designed a system like this must have been Johnny Cash himself. The amount of Zenny required to even buy all of these breakthrough capsules would have literally exceeded what Dr. Evil would have set it as.
$1 million.
And in Tenkaichi 1, this is how you unlock and use all of your character's ultimates, specials, and novel abilities. Due to all forms and special moves not being tied to items, and all ultimates and supers being balanced in a certain way, with novel attributes just being baked into the character itself, Tenkaichi 1 avoided all of these problems. You might be thinking, well, if all of your characters have everything out of the box, is there a sense of progression anymore? The game had an evolution system which allowed you to buff certain aspects of your character. Their attack, ki, defense, finishing moves, all could be enhanced. These Z items could be unlocked by playing the story or ultimate battle, and some of these items had really interesting effects, like reducing attributes of both characters at once, increasing lock-on speed or giving your character more dragon dashes, or just amping aspects based on the lore. Eternal energy androids could recover ki even faster, and Piccolo, Boo and Cell had access to passive regeneration. So you still had reason to play all the modes and make your character stronger without just removing what made them special to begin with. So many of the elements as to why people like Dragon Ball is certainly emphasized in this game. A nice added bonus is that Ryo's sparking direction also highlighted some of Dragon Ball's really great world design, and the battlefields very much had details that fans would appreciate. The Cell Arena had destroyed tanks and planes in the outskirts from when the army attempted to attack Cell within the show. While slightly harrowing, it certainly helps the ambiance. And even the TV reporters are watching. The Kame House is noticeable on the island stage for when the android Z fighters and Cell all fought each other. Supreme Kai's planet very much has a Z sword, and even that truck that Vegeta destroys when fighting Android 18 somehow made it into this game. So not only does the world look like the Dragon Ball world across different planets and dimensions, but details like this could have only have been done by those who really cared about the material. So, with everything that this game brought, how was it received? With mostly above average scores, they commended the developers' outside of the box approach to this game. Despite its commendable roster and graphics for the time, it couldn't quite escape being compared to fighting games, which further highlighted its simple gameplay and underdeveloped fighting game mechanics. Other knocks against the game included its really high CPU difficulty and its unorthodox control scheme. Fan sentiment was a little bit more positive. They liked the fact that there was a large list of characters, an expansive story mode, and some really interesting what-if scenarios, with the biggest complaint on the fan side being that you couldn't transform in battle. So the TLDR, if you appreciated its innovation factor and its character count, this game might have something for you, but if not, it's probably a miss. Games Radar would go on to say, with more drama than Tekken, and more guts than Dead or Alive, Tenkaichi literally has more balls than any beat-em-up released in the last 12 months. So how successful was the game from a commercial perspective? There are conflicting sales records for the Tenkaichi series, but according to Bandai's own fiscal reporting for that year, the game cleared at least 1 million units. It's likely that the game's total lifetime sales are indeed higher. So, you'd think that would be it, that this game would go off to get sequels, of which would become fan favorites. The sparking motif, which brought innovations across a number of areas, would be reference points for other Dragon Ball games in the future. But its innovation factor wasn't originally meant to stop here. The game that we got was a bit different from the game that they had imagined. Ryo would later reveal that the original proposal for this game was referred to as Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Evolution, and many features ended up being quite different. In earlier versions of the game, we might have actually seen more mechanics in relation to its battlefield system.
With Tenkaichi, you use the environment to your advantage. If there's rocks or something in the way, you want to throw your opponent into these rocks and destroy them. And if you know the stages very well, there's actually items and power-ups, energy, extra health.
Items or power-ups? While you might be thinking, this associate producer is only drumming up hype for the game, It would certainly make a lot of sense if it was planned at one point. In many of the marketing materials, you can pick up a sentiment of exploring the Dragon Ball world. Even the website it was based around had movement as a key feature, and many of the posters noted about battlefield exploration, and this is further enhanced by some of the commercials.
Gigantic free-roaming battlegrounds and a never-before-seen flight and fight system that gives you more freedom than ever. Fly anywhere.
But in the final game, the only thing you can really do in your environment when you're not locked onto your opponent is find Dragon Balls, of which rarely spawns. The only other gameplay advantage of destroying your environment is if you knock your opponent into something, they will lose extra health, but you very much need to be locked on in order to do this. While you did have to find your opponent at the start of the battle, this isn't intended to be a massive gameplay driver. Some strategies did involve using debris as cover to power up or hide from ki blasts, but all of this could very easily be destroyed. So for this theme of exploration, besides finding Dragon Balls, it would be a bit odd to base your entire marketing campaign around a few soft features, of which aren't even directly pointed at within the commercials. And it would be even more odd from a gameplay standpoint to not have items. Why develop such an elaborate mechanic where you have a radar system where you can find Dragon Balls of which appear live, while also having the ability to attain these mid-fight? The Dragon Balls themselves actually have physics-based logic to them, as they can move around and roll, and your character gets a custom visual effect if you pick them up. It's quite a lot of work for just one type of item. And why have a button that removes your lock-on from your opponent? It doesn't have any gameplay advantage. And in some places, it almost looks like there were leftover power-up animations that weren't removed. By activating a blast move that temporarily boosts your attack, you get glowing blue hands for some reason. Using the Evolution Z system, you can permanently boost your attack and any other stat for that matter, so why have a visual change for this one? Within the lore, while Dragon Ball characters do have a lot of abilities, glowing blue hands isn't really common, so a change like this one had to have been done for a reason. And why design all of these unique icons that are different from Evolution Z and give them a prominent place on the UI? And if you get hit with a smash attack, your character, if you hit the right buttons, almost gets engulfed in this new type of effect that looks like it boosts your speed. And quite interestingly, for your character to go into sparking in this game is much harder than its sequels. When at max ki, you have to charge your entire ki gauge again until it goes blue, and if you get interrupted, which happens a lot in this game, you have to start all over again. So without a clear overhang mechanic, going into sparking is actually quite challenging. So why make this mode, which is clearly a key driver for its vision, so much harder to do? It would make a lot of sense if this was tied to an item. While there is clear gameplay benefits and some animations and assets that are left over, I couldn't find any real evidence of battle items themselves, either within the game or any demo footage. And Don just doesn't say this in one interview, he says it in several, that in the gameplay, destroying your environment would have clear benefits to the player.
To encourage the players to kind of bring some chaos into it, we've also added in, we're going to add in power-ups like health or energy or extra damage or extra defense, so you're going to want to try and explore these levels.
It's certainly fun to speculate on what this game could have been had they kept them in. And within these demos, there's actually changes that imply a slightly different game. Goku has charging and power-up animations that aren't present in the final game. Maybe this was tied to an item, or maybe they just retweaked the animation. Looking at the HUD there, the UI looks like it's shaped in the fashion of a scouter, similar to the Budokai 3 games. While a lot of the visual flair would be taken away, the hierarchy of components are actually quite interesting. This implies that the ki gauge is more important than your health bar, and these extra visuals that exist on the right side clearly indicate when you have a lot of ki available to you, perhaps further indicating that the sparking motif and being in max power is an integral part of the gameplay. And in later iterations of the build before launch, you can note that the Dragon radar system at the bottom has changed into a scouter. And with how the developer is playing Goku in this version of the build, there is more effort to run away and shoot ki blasts from afar, and very much using the environment to hide, with the scouter very much being the one true point of reference to your enemy. All of this together was likely done to give the player even more gameplay options. While we still saw some of this in the final game, it would certainly make a lot more sense as to why people felt that the combat system was shallow, and I heavily suspect that this scouter build might have been something very close to launch, as in the promotional material for this game, there's an elaborate advert with Goku using the scouter, which, for anyone who's watched the show, this is really out of character for him.
Okay, I promised Dr. Briefs I'd give this scouter a try. I've never had a use for these things before. But he said he made some pretty awesome upgrades. Wow, there are so many fighters! Humans, Saiyans, Namekians, Majins, Kais, even the whole Ginyu Force. Dr. Briefs was right. This scouter does come in handy.
Something that I found particularly interesting about this commercial is that the scouter has an option called Battleground Analysis. You might be rightfully thinking, hang on a minute, this is just an element to spice up an advert, and it was likely just made by a marketing department. But if you look at all of the other modes in that scouter, all of them are present within the final game. Fighter profiles ended up being character illustrations, and Evolution of Power ended up being Evolution Z. So maybe there was a lost mode which enabled the player to better understand battlefields. There's also a fighter profile for Pycon, but he isn't in the final game, so perhaps there were a few characters that were left for the sequel.
I can't believe there's so many. Pycon, Dabura...
Budokai Tenkaichi, or Sparking, could have been a very different style of game had the devs kept the battle items in. While there is no answer as to why they were removed, what we did get with this game was a really large step forward. For Rio taking up the mantle of mainline Dragon Ball games and wanting to make a mark on them, had certainly delivered on switching up the status quo with his vision and proving its commercial success, making big changes in some areas and adding details that only fans would appreciate. And even the intro for the game sets a rather different tone from what players had experienced with Budokai 3. While being very different and all CGI, even aspects of this inspire games nowadays. In summary, this is an honest attempt at trying to add new life to a gaming series that could have just continued to do the same thing. This game deserves the good reviews it got for its time, and while it hasn't exactly aged the best, or be seen in the most positive light nowadays, I do think this game added quite the foundation for what was to come.
Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi. Everything else was just training.
What's that in your hand? Oh, hell no. Lady, you listen to me right now. You put that bomb down and turn it out. We have to jump. Come on. Use your jacket. Turn that bomb off. Crazy ass.
Handling explosives is normally problematic, unless you were built different. Developer Spike were arming their next game. The only real question was if fans would be able to handle it. Within the following year, we would find out. In late 2006, a year after the first game, the West was introduced to Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 2, with its Japanese name being Dragon Ball Z Sparking Neo. This game had more modes, more things to do within those modes, more gameplay options within combat, more characters, more stages, more transformations, more special moves, more progression, and more items for you to unlock. Whichever way you sliced it, this was a game with more. You might be rightfully thinking, well, more doesn't equal better, but the sheer amount of content added, attention to detail, replay value, and completely overhauled combat system left many questioning if it was even done by the same team.
Holy crap! Are we looking at the same series?
The overall style and presentation of this game felt a lot closer to its source material compared to its predecessor. Characters looked more like themselves and less blocky. Ki blasts had more variation between them in size, color, shape, and frequency, all which felt more personalized to the character you were playing. Auras had more form and looked more colorful than the first game. Rush moves had a bit of a facelift, looking more dynamic and having more novel animations per character. and ultimate moves were much more polished, appearing more similar to the high standards that Budokai 3 set, with better voice work, cinematic camera angles, and novel visual effects. Battlefields were now twice as big as before. Projectile-based special moves now felt more impactful with multiple hits and better camera angles. Battle damage to models looked much more prominent, and some characters even had additional costumes. All of this together really helped make the game feel like it had more of a distinct style. While its aesthetic layer certainly had more drip, what about the gameplay? The combat system was significantly more layered compared to its first installment. The desire to bring the game even closer to the dynamic and high-intensity battles from the anime may have pushed the team at Spike to incorporate more traditional fighting game elements. Either way, the amount of attacking, defense, and movement options the player had increased massively. Offense saw the biggest upgrade. Not only did the amount of attacking options greatly increase, but the ability to chain and extend combos together also did too. Within the first game, your opponent would drop after being hit 5 times, and there was only 2 rushing techniques in the whole game, whereas its sequel changed falling logic so that your opponent wouldn't drop after 5 hits, and would only do so if you hit them with the same rushing technique twice. The rushing techniques themselves also expanded to rolling hammer, ground slash, lift strike, and flying kicks, and many of the rushing techniques also gained their own follow-up combos within themselves. So not only did you have more ways to keep a combo going, once you layer in the fact that players could further extend combos themselves with step-ins or using key blasts to allow for more hits, was quite the upgrade. And if you hit your opponent away, this game allowed the player to even combo that, as it was now much easier to do follow-up dragon dashes, and a new inclusion of the banishing attack, of which normally gave an easy setup for further ranged attacks, and even dashing in had its own unique combo follow-up. And if all of that wasn't electrifying enough, while in sparking you had the ability to just combo continuously, extra follow-ups if you hit your opponent away, and new moves like the Hyper Smash, or a move that's very on brand for this franchise, an over-the-top Dragon Smash. And you could also throw giant characters now, just for good measure I suppose. For movement, characters themselves felt a lot more fluid and faster. There was non-linear directional options, more advanced dash cancels off of moves, and players could now teleport on top of dodging around their opponent. And within sparking, some characters had access to hyperspeed movement. And with the overall gameplay being much faster, having options like this really allowed for more interesting situations. With so many new ways to move, attack your opponent, and create situations for them to deal with, the defensive options, thankfully, saw a massive upgrade. To defend, players now had power guarding and multiple counter stances, and some characters even had sways.
You ain't got the answer, Sway! How, Sway?
And some of the Blast 1 moves allowed for auto-teleporting, countering, or just having raw armor to your character. And of course, the classic combo breaker in its explosive wave. And being how the player could now transform in and out of different forms, which themselves could change a range of stats, moves, and combat options, this really did add a layer of complexity. The inclusion of team battles, meaning you could bring up to 5 characters with you, of which some had access to fusion, further empowering them, really did create more options for the player. The shift in the combat system was so drastic, it's almost hard to imagine that its predecessor was knocked for being quite simple. Perhaps internally they saw that as a challenge. If making the combat more dynamic and feeling more similar to the show wasn't enough, by far the biggest and most memorable aspect of this game was its story mode, also referred to as Dragon Adventure. This mode had pretty much every single fight you could possibly imagine, starting from Z all the way to the end of GT, plus pretty much every movie at the time. If there was a fight within that show, it's probably in this game. But what makes this story mode memorable? Why do people still talk about it? This game had a few elements that blended other style of games into one. Returning from Budokai 3 was the overworld map where you could fly to different locations, start fights, find items, and begin side stories. Sagas were presented in a similar manner to how the episodes were in the show, starting off with some narration.
Peace has now been shattered by the arrival of the monster, Majin Buu. two old rivals have joined forces, combining their powers to become the ultimate fusion warrior.
And for some of the chapters within these scenarios, if they were elaborate story beats, they would sometimes have unique cutscenes. And the way the chapters were structured within a scenario really made you feel like you were progressing through a really large story. Beginning in the overworld map, the red dot would signify where the story developments are. After entering, you would see a simple cutscene showcasing some of these new events, which normally ended in a conflict.
Have you come to stop me? Don't make me laugh. Oh, I'm not here to defeat you. I'm here to tear you apart, one piece at a time.
The player was then asked to prepare for that fight, and after winning that battle, you then get to see the outcome, which normally led to further plot progression, which also contained a hook to the next chapter. This cycle was really quite novel, as it gave the player the impression they were progressing through a really large epic story, similar to what the show was actually like.
Don't interfere, Trunks! It seems Vegeta is going to help me get my wish.
This combined with some RPG mechanics made the game feel quite distinct. As you would complete fights, you would attain money, gain items, and level up attributes to your character, giving you a sense of progression. In some encounters, you were forced to pick between certain characters, and depending on which ones you had leveled up, this could have a real effect on your gameplay. So not only when you were playing through its story mode did you see events play out, but you also got to unlock a range of different content. The items themselves had a bit of an expansion since the last game. While there was very much ability, support, fusion, and secret types, the amount of support type items from before went from a handful to, well...
Oh, Neptune.
This enabled the player to build their character with slightly different setups so they played the way you wanted. Make your attacks unblockable, massively boost all of your core stats, drain your opponent's ki passively, or get free after images if you're low on health. All of this together made the story mode have a lot of replay value, as it underpinned unlocking all of this content within the game. The Dragon Ball world itself had a range of secret encounters. While challenging, they unlocked a bunch of rewards. Some areas allowed you to recruit extra members to your party. You could find money, powerful items, or even a Dragon Ball lying around. And of course, the classic style RPG hints from various characters. The manner in which scenario exploration worked meant that not only did you have incentive to retake fights on a harder difficulty, but if your character had transformations that were unlocked at later parts of the story, going back to older sagas meant that you had everything unlocked out of the gate. And being how some optional fights within the story are borderline impossible to win, if you ended up going back with a really high level character and winning, you would actually unlock what if sagas. And further adding to this grand 60-hour adventure was its phenomenal score. The music for this game was a standout feature, especially when compared to its predecessor. For the first Sparking game, Ryo aimed to connect the soundtrack more closely to the anime experience. The Japanese release of that game achieved this by using the OST directly lifted from the anime. Kikuchi's legendary score from the Japanese dub helped create a link between the game and the show. For international versions, however, the situation was a bit more complicated due to the regional licensing issues of music and the fact that when Dragon Ball Z was localized into different languages, they sometimes had unique scores created for that region. Even removing the licensing issues, even if they did use Kikuchi's score, it wouldn't have the same effect universally. In place of adapting the soundtrack to each region's dub, the team chose to lift many tracks from the earlier Budokai titles. While this was something that Dragon Ball gamers had heard before, it further made both the Budokai series and the Budokai Tenkaichi series outside of Japan even harder to separate. The Budokai title's soundtrack was composed by Kenji Yamamoto, and he would go on to produce tracks for mainly video games, but ultimately was given permission for the Kai soundtrack in Japan. While a lot of his work was definitely great, if you know anything about this composer, you certainly know where this is going. It's just a shame that Toei didn't.
my lawyer.
While Yamamoto's reputation as a plagiarist would not come to light for several years, Ryo opted to do something more novel for the international versions for his sequel. Recognizing the challenges of licensing the Kikuchi's Japanese score, he opted to craft an entirely new soundtrack specifically for the American and European versions, and he very much turned to a new composer, Takanori Arima. This guy went absolutely nuts and created arguably the best OST to a Dragon Ball game, with people even today asking for its release. With an ambitious Dragon Adventure mode attempting to depict Dragon Ball's expansive and iconic story, this music did a lot to depict the calm, utter despair, crazy plot twists, and many other cornerstones of the material. And this really was the perfect companion to a really long story mode. And while the opening was insanely memorable, you got into the mood to fight some intense battles because of the soundtrack. Some of them really helped drive intrigue. Some only played when shit was about to go down. Some implied that all times were lost. Some you played to go on a training montage. Some implied you were about to discover something. Some got you ready for a really challenging fight. Some were the perfect song to play when a villain survives all of your attacks. Some acted like an adrenaline shot for what was about to happen. And some just really made you want to go on an adventure. This soundtrack was a gift, and thankfully it didn't just play mostly in story mode. While the player got to see the return of the standard World Tournament mode, the dueling mode on the other hand had more to offer with full tag fights and 5-on-5 brawls. In place of the standard Ultimate Battle from its predecessor of 100 fights, we got Ultimate Battle Z, a series of classic fighting game towers with different themes, putting some of the game's new features to the test. Some were survival style, others were tag based, others were 1v2, and they were all themed based on lore. Unlike many fighting games, there's very much secret encounters in these towers, with winning under certain conditions unlocking extra fights.
An intruder!
The character illustrations from the last game had been further expanded with dragon text being added. With all of this extra content in this mode about the story, character histories, it really did make the player feel like they could learn more about the overall Dragon Ball lore, with such a heavy emphasis on adventure and progression throughout its story mode. And with a much more dynamic and robust combat system, the overall sentiment the player was left with was that it's half an RPG and half a fighting game. The game wanted you to explore the Dragon Ball world, level up your characters, recruit more members to your party, learn more about them in the character encyclopedias, and of course collect, buy, and fuse a range of items. And due to the secret type of items helping unlock characters and further transformations, paying attention to the story and the lore was actually rewarded in how you would mix these two together. And there were even guidebooks that were made around the strategy of the game, which highlighted what characters were capable of, details on what the Dragon Ball world was full of, and further hints about how you could get the most out of items and find secret encounters. All of this plus having more dynamic fights, more emphasis on combos, more movement and defensive options, Mortal Kombat style arcade towers, world tournaments, tag fights, and a much higher skill ceiling. This truly was an explosive combination. While many fans were enjoying this on the PlayStation 2, a new version of this game was just around the corner, just before the release of Budokai 3, a project by Nintendo internally referred to as GC Next, all culminated in this announcement.
Nintendo is working on our next system, and that system will create a gaming revolution.
And at the time Nintendo Revolution was veiled in mystery, it would take until the first Sparking game for the gaming scene to even hear more about it. And due to its promise of revolutionizing the gaming scene and Nintendo's track record of actually doing so, many developers were eager to be a part of its history. After many rumors and fake leaks that would only fool people in the 2000s, the Nintendo Wii was finally revealed to the gaming scene. This took gamers by storm, and even attempting to attain one was a challenge all on its own. With the promise of innovation and an uncertain amount of supply and demand, certainly led to a range of situations. Excitement was certainly building for this console. Game developers hadn't quite figured out the best practices and patterns for using motion controls just yet. The concept of new exciting ways to play, and games producer Rio, likely keen on making the Sparking series something memorable and innovative, might have just been the perfect storm to try something new.
But this is first time to disclose, but we are planning to release Budokai Tenkaichi 2 game with the platform of Nintendo Revolution.
With breaking new ground for the Dragon Ball games, Rio had just proven he was comfortable doing so. So what would he do with this? And with all the work that was clearly present within the PlayStation 2 game, some were questioning how much innovation would really go into motion controls. Rio would later comment that in the game's proposal process for Tenkaichi 2, motion controls were highlighted as a focus for players. And being as how this proposal was likely done all the way back in 2005, what would come later wouldn't be a surprise. Atari would claim that Tenkaichi 2 would be a launch title for the Nintendo Wii, which would follow up the PlayStation 2 release a month later. And with the gaming industry high on the Wii hype train, some were eagerly awaiting as to what a Dragon Ball Z title would do on a Nintendo Wii. With a year of work, commitment to motion controls, and being available on console release, Nintendo chose to give this game a prominent spot in its conventions and many adverts showing off its library. And for the E3 before the console's release, Nintendo chose to make this title one of the highlights on the game floor to further show off what their console was capable of. For those who fought their way to pick up a Nintendo Wii on launch day, if they were tired of getting completely peppered by one of the most strongest enemies of all time in a video game, they could now try and fight Goku's toughest enemies in a video game. The Nintendo Wii version of Tenkaichi 2 had all of the content of the PlayStation 2 version, slightly better graphics and exclusive new characters and extra battlefields. Wii players were the first to be graced with the legendary Frieza Soldier, and of course, motion controls. And while this would be a prominent feature in many of its commercials, the manner in which they attempted to sell this was questionable at best.
Fight!
While this guy is having the time of his life, it does beg into question how advertisers looked at the Wii demographic. And there's this weird thing in the commercials where the person would speak but then a character would finish their sentence.
Been a long time since I've been at full power, you freak. You won't survive this time. Fight!
While Japanese adverts can be quite evocative and generate a lot of confusion for Western audiences, it's almost like they took that concept but tried to replace it with cringe. Taking a look at one of the less egregious adverts, it does appear to be trying to get people excited for acting out motions and seeing your character perform them. Taking a closer look at this guy, who I'm still going to call Luke, he does appear to have the face of content after winning a game, so maybe they did get something right. While not all the motions Luke was doing there actually correlated to what was going on screen, and clearly some people in the edit room were not paying too much attention that a special beam cannon was being triggered by a Kamehameha motion, with a range of other oddities in some of the other adverts too. But luckily for players, a lot of time did go into the motion controls, and you could actually do quite a lot with it. While the player still had the choice of using a traditional set of controls, the game developers fully utilized the Wii Remote and Nunchuck. The player now had a cursor on screen and a different set of UI options in the corner, indicating progress on certain moves. Moving the Nunchuck down dashes the character forward, holding up both controllers initiated block, holding the C button down and gesturing your controllers upwards or downwards controlled your ability to ascend or descend. And of course, the very thing that those adverts really tried to get across, you could do special moves with the controller. By holding the B and the Z buttons down and aiming your controller at the screen and performing a few gestures, you could initiate moves. A traditional Kamehameha was done by thrusting the controller back and then forward, and nearly all special moves was a sequence of moving your controller in certain directions. So the Spirit Bomb, you raise your arms up and then throw it back down. While the level of immersion did differ depending on what character you selected, as some were harder to do than others, for the most part, players kind of enjoyed being able to act out certain moves, even if it was only for a short period of time. Because we know full well that if you've watched one of these shows, you've definitely tried to do one of the special moves, and at least in this game, it finally did something.
This is something that's been on my heart for a long time. You know, if you actually set your mind to it and believe, you can achieve it. This is it. My name is Jalen, and I am a Super Saiyan.
Utilizing the powers of a Super Saiyan was quite fun in this game, and a nice little added bonus was that the amount of broken televisions created was remarkably low. If you look at footage of Wii Remotes breaking things, two things are normally present. The first is that the player isn't wearing a strap, and the second is that they're playing a game that doesn't use the nunchuck. Perhaps the second reason is why we didn't see a lot of broken TVs attempting to do the Kamehameha, as this game needed both controllers to play. And it very much wasn't for a lack of trying either.
Do you like Kamehameha?
Whether you viewed motion controls as a gimmick or not, what couldn't be denied is the amount of content added. In relation to its predecessor, many of the core elements of this game are a clear upgrade. Even going through many of the early promotional materials for this game, they don't inherently allude to half of these upgrades, but more so softer features like its character roster or special attacks. But closer to launch, the team had far more to share with players.
And also we have the 200 battle event in the story mode.
We doubled the amount of story mode basically.
60 hours playtime we estimated, you know, because we're gonna have 120 characters in total, which is the most number in the fighting game.
Some of you might be thinking, how did a developer put so much into a sequel in less than a year? With all of the new content and improvements to the gameplay, and launching it on 2 different platforms, of which one of them is new hardware with no development history to go off of, which also pushes teams to rethink interactions. How did they pull all of this off? While there's an argument that games of older generations are much easier to design and develop for, as nowadays expectations have grown over time with what the technology allows for. So with more time, money and people needed in order to make games, maybe this one just isn't as impressive anymore. While there's definitely some truth into the ever-changing development costs of games, if you begin comparing the Tenkaichi series to other games getting yearly installments at the time, it starts to become more clear how much of an upgrade this was. A gaming series like Naruto Ultimate Ninja, for instance, got 5 installments over 5 years. It initially went from a roster of around 14 characters to a final roster of about 62 characters, while most of the effort went into its story mode rather than its characters or gameplay, and this also being a bit of an apples to orange comparison here, with Dragonball benefiting from the fact that it had a finished story and other successful games as a reference point at the time. What it does though is illustrate the sheer amount amount of content added between each installment for a yearly game.
Do you think you got him?
So where did some of this worth ethic come from? Why add so much when other competitors aren't doing the same? Rio would later comment, and for the next one, we thought that people wouldn't be impressed if we just marginally increased the roster, so we decided to go for a minimum of 120 characters. We really felt like we had to surpass the players' expectation. This can be further demonstrated in all of the leaked beta and demo versions of Tenkaichi 2. The easy choice for the developers would have been to just add a new set of characters and call it a day, and some early versions of the builds actually had this, even having some of the same UI, overall controls and combat from the last game. The gameplay in some of these very much highlight that super moves very much didn't have a sense of impact or interesting camera angles, and some of these attacks don't even appear like they connect very well. And even the way some characters were built, for example Goku goes from Super Saiyan 3 to Super Saiyan 4, this would reflect just the Tenkaichi 1 version of the character being able to transform. But in the final game of Tenkaichi 2, he split out as his Z and GT counterparts. While in some of the older versions of this build there are just straight up graphical issues and bugs, it does further highlight how much polish the final game had even compared to some of the late stage versions. Taking Goku from earlier, not only has one of his rushes from Super Saiyan 4 been tweaked in animation, but they've also given it to a different form entirely, with the Super Saiyan 4 in the final game having an even more dynamic and novel rush. And even his other moves like his Kamehameha times 10 is now red and has slightly better visual effects. And the more that you look at other characters, do you further notice the quality of life changes. Not only do some of the moves work differently now, like some being chargeable, but the VFX themselves have changed to be better fitting for that character. And even those that appear that they haven't changed that much, just a few tweaks to sound effects just make attacks feel that much more impactful. And within some of the other builds, it becomes more apparent that the devs tried multiple ways of controlling how the characters work. Just the sheer amount of changes between each build and how many builds themselves there are really highlight that the team at Spike were trying to make this game a certain way. While in recent years, there's certainly a growing culture centered around uncovering lost media. For a series with annual installments, it's remarkable to find genuine lost content. Most finds within this space tend to be unused designs or early placeholder information left over from an earlier stage of development. Despite this, dedicated modders within the scene managed to unearth content over a decade later. Within the demo disc for this game, the Dragon Adventure mode contained 3 scenarios for fans to play, but digging through the game's files, there's actually a 4th scenario that isn't present anywhere in the final game. It was an extra custom-made what-if scenario in which Dr. Gero and Android 19 were defeated by Yamcha, and he ends up being the savior from the androids. Due to this even being fully voiced in both English and Japanese, and having a series of fights laid out with clear dialogue, it's quite surprising that this was even cut.
Still waiting, after all these years, for his chance to save the world.
Due to the passionate work of a few modders, the actual gameplay and story was restored, and it is somewhat playable.
You're nowhere near as strong as Trunks said.
Some of the interesting story points of this scenario is that Yamcha manages to turn Cell into a good guy, and he calls Bulma to change the personalities of 17 and 18 before they awake.
We can use the computer to give them better personalities.
Thanks to Yamcha, I'm one of the good guys now.
With the enemy of this saga being Metacooler,
Not for Cell, my plan would have gone perfectly.
who's using the Big Getty Star to power evil androids. 17 and 18 choose to merge with Cell in order to stop him, all thanks to Yamcha.
Absorb us so you can achieve your perfect form.
They're going to destroy the Earth.
I guess there's no way around it. If I don't stop them, who will?
But even in this story, Yamcha couldn't get a break.
Then, absorbing parts from androids 13 and 19, Metacooler summoned his terrible energy, suddenly launching a massive beam at Yamcha. Who did I hit? Oh, Yamcha, huh?
I imagine that this scenario was originally meant to be unlocked by the mission Yamcha's Close Call within the Android Saga. In the final game, it's just a survival mission, but I think it was intended to be a secret encounter. It's still a really challenging fight, and if you do win, it gives you Zenny. And while this would unfortunately be lost on many of the people who played this game, the nuance they added to the combat system was actually much greater than most people realized. While many remember this game as characters being quite similar to play, with only really them changing on an aesthetic level with their super moves, the reality is that the skill ceiling added to this game was so high it made all characters quite different if you really looked for it. Even the standard 5-hit combo had different logic depending on which character you picked. Even by pressing the attack button 5 times, it does different amounts of hits depending on your character. Some racked them up really fast like Berta, and some characters like Grey Apes couldn't even combo 5 hits together at all. And even holding the attack button down for a charge smash had interesting logic too. Every character had 5 smashes, a neutral one, up, down, left and right. And there was always 3 levels to a smash, a light one, a medium one, and a heavy one. The level would be denoted by this charge meter, and depending on the character you picked, they charged at very different rates. Some characters had access to different smashes depending on when they triggered it within a sequence. A character like Krillin, his charge smash actually moves him forward, Lord Slug has insane reach, and Tien's actually changes his position. And if there wasn't already loads of attacking options, you could actually chain some of these smashes together. By beginning a combo and ending in a type of light smash, you could continue a combo for free, and just this within itself helped differentiate characters even further. Adult Super Saiyan 2 Gohan could chain his up smash but nothing else. Janemba was too slow to chain anything. A character like Zanya could chain all 5 of her smashes in one combo. And for some, chaining light smashes wasn't the only hurdle, as certain characters couldn't even combo into a light smash itself. The nuances within the charge logic didn't just stop there. There was interesting knock-on effects from mechanisms being brought over from the first game, due to its predecessor being more about exploration and 3D movement over in-depth combat mechanics. The smash meter itself worked differently in both games. This mechanic was a driver for sending your opponent into the distance, but within the first game you could only do so if your charge meter was dialed up to red, and unlike its successor, the player couldn't just hold down an attack button and charge it all the way up. This meant that the player would have to build up to it within a combo. This created the interesting byproduct of that stronger characters could easily charge their smash gauge, while less powerful ones had to work much harder to fill out this gauge to red. Within that game, it made a lot of sense that when you unlocked more powerful characters, they felt stronger, but this had a strange effect on its sequel. A really strong character like Super 17 charged his smashes really fast due to the logic of the first game, but with more of the advanced combat mechanisms of this game, it presented some really weird challenges. While many of his light chain combos do work, they're just really hard to pull off because of how fast it charges. The player has a much narrower window, and this very much applies to some of the other powerful characters in the game, and it somewhat makes some of the less strong ones much more easier to use. But on the other hand, a character like Super Saiyan 2 Teen Gohan is so fast in his recovery and startup speed that you can actually chain light smashes into themselves. And then a character's Ki Blast adds a level of versatility within itself. Some can knock you down, some can freeze you in place, some just provide a bit of hit stun. Each Ki Blast can move at different speeds, a user can fire them at different rates, and some are just straight up unblockable. And because charge smashes can be cancelled, you can then follow up combos with Ki Blasts in order to extend them. And believe it or not, this game had even more advanced movement and attacking options on top of all of this. So with all of the normal and advanced mechanics in this game, it's quite easy as to why some people have chosen to play it like a fighting game. So with so much added, some things glossed over and others just hidden away, it wouldn't surprise me if a few things went under the radar. So in the process of doing the initial research for this video, I discovered that Tenkaichi 2 actually did have a set of battle items, and I don't know if this is one of those Mandela effects, but when I played this game at launch, I don't remember this being in it. Perhaps what Don said wasn't an empty developer promise. Maybe it was a warning. So if you go into settings and flip battle items to on, you can try and make it Smash Brothers. While these items aren't as elaborate as the hammer, the baseball bat, whatever this thing was, they still did have an effect on gameplay. There was items which either increased your health, your ki, the amount of blast stocks you had, or it put you directly into sparking. This mechanic is advertised nowhere. Even the tutorial completely ignores that this is in the game. The only real mention of it is an offhand reference in the gaming manual. We can only really speculate as to why the devs put this in but didn't communicate about it. Being as how all the power-ups look like different coloured Dragon Balls, I can't imagine that they put large amounts of effort into this. Perhaps we missed the boat on having items be a big part of this series. By the second installment, a direction was chosen to be more similar to a fighting game, and wanting the overall gameplay to feel very fast, dynamic, and a bit explosive also led the devs to include planetary destructions. From a game's design point of view, having a focus on making the player find items and power-ups, but also having moves that completely destroy the planet, wiping away all debris, together feel like conflict. And at a certain point, the devs probably chose to focus on the fighting game elements and its explosive nature.
Did somebody say boom?
With everything this game came packed with, what was its reception like? While receiving mostly average scores which leaned positively, the Nintendo Wii version of this game in particular drew a lot of attention because of its unique controls, and its improvement to its combat system was certainly noted by some reviewers.
Anime-based fighting games are usually short, one-dimensional affairs, but this latest Dragon Ball manages to be something more than that. This isn't the greatest fighter you're ever going to play, but you don't need to be a hardcore Dragon Ball nerd to enjoy what's on offer, thanks to the active Wii control.
The impressive amount of content, additions to its gameplay, and overall design and presentation was certainly noted. Some of the knocks against this game is that due to its length, it could feel rather repetitive. And while a novel factor that many wanted to try, the motion controls could be quite tricky in some places. And while a large factor of enjoying a game like this does depend on how much you like the franchise, even those unfamiliar with the source material did find enjoyment within this game, including those that really disliked the franchise.
One franchise that has been almost unceasingly bad is the Dragon Ball Z series.
Yep, with its pointless button mashing and nonsensical storylines, the badness of Dragon Ball Z has earned it a reputation as the Steven Seagal of fighting games.
Dragon Ball fans hate us because these games are mediocre or worse. So the scores we give them are mediocre or worse. This fast-paced, arm-flailing fighter goes balls out. Aside from all the flashy arm-flinging action, I must reluctantly concede that Tenkaichi 2 is one of the better-looking games for the Wii. And if you put aside a couple of hours to learn it, there's some decent fun to be had. Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 2? Oh gosh, I'm gonna do it. A 4.
Have you finally lost your mind?
Out of 5.
The Dragon Ball franchise producing quality games, it just doesn't really make any sense.
No.
And you know a game is good if it's made in another country and even racists like it.
Can you really blame us? Because who knows anything about Japanese history? There were some samurai, they periodically killed themselves, a rat learned judo, and they invented a religion that sanctifies small trees and fat guys wrestling. Then we nuked them. That's what they turned into a real country.
My God. But for the demographic this was actually aimed at, how did this go down with Dragon Ball fans? They viewed this game as leaps and bounds ahead of its former installment, and this was really the first game to get the Tenkaichi series feeling right. And not only was this game filled with even more details relating to its source material, but the amount of content added kept players busy for a really long time. While this is certainly lost nowadays with the rise of wikis, discords, and heavy coverage on YouTube, among many other leaks and discoveries on social media. Back when this game initially launched in the 2000s, actually discovering and unlocking content was a game within itself. The amount of empty spaces within the roster, plus the fact that the UI doesn't actually make it clear how many forms a character could have. This inherently drove a lot of intrigue among players, and it wasn't quite clear how you actually unlocked characters either, with the item fusion mechanic unlocking a lot of content also being rather cryptic within itself.
The combination is no good. It seems you don't quite have the hang of this.
This forced players to look elsewhere, either through having a friend who knew more about the game than you, attempting to go on the Atari forums, buying one of the guides, or you could try your luck on the completely unhinged mid-2000s YouTube. While the quality and level of admirations for the developers were rather questionable, the community-leaning forums and content was one of the only ways to get the most out of the game. And with the password feature from Budokai 3 making a return in the Sparking series, within this installment, those passwords very much unlocked a really highly level character, usually 160, and being as how all characters start at level 8, attaining these could be really fun for the player. So if you didn't want to deal with unhinged posts or obvious fake cheats, the chances of the player getting the most out of Tenkaichi 2 could be lessened, but either way, this game would very much go down as a fan favorite for years to come, still being seen in a very positive light nowadays with all of its replay value and Dragon Adventure mode. This sequel would absolutely harden the foundation that the first game set. The direction of having elements from other gaming genres, coupled with innovative motion controls layered with lots of new content, pushed it to be Bandai's most successful game of that year. And it's been argued that this was the best sequel to any of the gaming series within the franchise. Whether you agree with that statement or not is up to you, but the amount of content added to this game, particularly in relation to its competitors, can't really be ignored, and it was quite clear that for a follow-up to be this much of an upgrade within a year time frame implied that the team behind it needed to have dedication, passion, a good understanding of its source material, and a willingness to innovate. It's amazing to think about all the other things a team like this could do. Perhaps they could even complete successful space operations, unlike some teams. Speaking of meteoric third acts that would change the landscape completely, Rio was hoping to end this gaming series with a bang that would end them all. And it could only come from a sparking meteor. With the end soon approaching, what was happening before impact? After its first two installments, having innovation as a key factor, either in its style of gameplay, new ways to control a character, or just adding a wealth of content, fans began to speculate, what could the final installment really bring? Would it choose to go down a new path? Its second installment chose to double down and be more similar to a fighting game, and even soften some features which were more of a priority in its first installment. This was all further amplified by the precedent that the Budokai series left. While from the player's perspective, each new installment was better than what came before, but from a commercial perspective, the opposite was true. This was likely something that Rio was trying to navigate for his series. How could he elevate the franchise to new heights without falling into the same pitfalls? The team began teasing their vision through official websites and numerous demos showcased at conventions. The final chapter of the Sparking series, now titled Sparking Meteor or Budokai Tenkaichi 3 internationally, was starting to take shape. The team made it rather clear that playing it safe wasn't an option, branding the game as the ultimate DBZ Budokai Tenkaichi experience is certainly an ambitious standard. One of the reoccurring themes in many of the marketing materials was the promise of experiences that the player couldn't find anywhere else. This philosophy even extended to the game itself on different platforms, having specific features for either the PlayStation 2 or Nintendo Wii. While Wii players could certainly expect motion controls that the PlayStation 2 gamers couldn't, both releases would have one unique mode that the other one wouldn't have. And while closer to launch we would know the names of these modes, actually knowing what the player would experience was still a bit of a mystery. And for the Japanese player base, if they pre-ordered the game, they would even get a Shenron keychain. And quite interestingly, this was the first and only installment to the Sparking series to receive a special collector's edition. This further highlighted its significance as the definitive entry into the Sparking series. This drive to set this installment apart from the other two pushed Rio to explore creative avenues that would further make it even more unique. with Ryo's original vision of the series being inspired from the anime's opening. To further make this the ultimate sparking game, Ryo made a special request: to have the game's opening theme to be sung by none other than Hironobu Kageyama. The legendary singer behind the anime's beloved Head Chala accepted the request, and this collaboration was heavily emphasized in some of the promotional material, particularly Japanese commercials. A new track, Super Survivor, was quite catchy and rather exciting. As launch day approached, new details about the game began to surface, either through official announcements or leaks online. One of its killer features was starting to be more and more apparent: a staggering volume of characters. While a staple of the series now, the idea of including such an expansive cast, even despite its previous installment being the largest one of a Dragon Ball game, this was very much starting to live up to its own marketing material, hinting at the inclusion of characters that players never expected to see, just so they could be punched in the face. So with a set of characters promising to be the largest amount in any fighting game, left many people to question who would be picked. And this led some to explore the depths of Windows Movie Maker style YouTube videos showing off character leaks in glorious 360p.
Don't you think that's fun? No.
With marketing in full swing, hype was building quite rapidly for its third and final installment of this generation. Ryo flew from Japan all over the world to not just show off the PlayStation 2 and Wii versions of the game, but also face many hard to answer questions from gaming journalists.
I'm here with Ryo, the producer, and Yasu, the localization manager for Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3? Tenkaichi 3. Okay, I can do that. For Dragon Ball Budokai Tenkaichi 3, Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi.
I cannot believe I put 10,000 baht for this shit.
The localization for Dragon Ball Z 3.
Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3.
Nearly a year since the last installment, for Nintendo Wii and PlayStation 2 gamers, they were about to collide with Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3. This game had the most amount of modes and the widest selection of things to do in the trilogy. The story mode had changed quite significantly since the last two games. It was no longer a long-form RPG like the second, nor was it a granular retelling of events like the first game. Being referred to as Dragon History, there were now a few fights that were heavily interactable and had a lot of cinematic elements to it. Many number of fights now just became one mission, where you had a prompt that took you to different stages of a fight, highlighting the twists of many plot points. This mechanic had a large effect on gameplay. Triggering one of these prompts could do a variety of actions, normally relating to either moving the story forward or changing the gameplay parameters in some way.
And unless you played the mission in the past, pressing one of these buttons could be quite unpredictable for the player. It could trigger a cutscene, give your character a new transformation, switch out player or enemy characters, make your opponent invincible, debuff your character entirely, start some sort of clash, or just instantly kill your enemy. And because the multitude of actions could also stack within themselves, you could press the story trigger once and it completely changed the situation. Taking the battle with Frieza against many of the Z fighters, for instance. Pressing the story trigger starts a cutscene, gives Frieza a new transformation, shows another cutscene,
Goes to show why you don't judge a book by its cover.
tags out your enemy character, and give your character a buff with increased key charging and armor. While this was very much done to move the plot forward, the format of cutscene battle cutscene was now completely different with a dynamic system like this. You now had a multitude of characters commenting throughout the events of a fight, with the player having to deal with an ever-changing situation. And because of all of the gameplay implications, this actually did make some story points feel more impactful. So taking the battle where Goku fights Android 19, because he has the heart virus at this part of the story, within the mission Goku starts with much lower life and his attacks do very little damage.
So when you eventually get to play as a fully powered up Super Saiyan Vegeta, he just tears into Android 19's life bar. And while this very much reflects the story, it's also really satisfying for the player who's just struggled against an opponent and now can completely steamroll them.
As I thought, what a letdown.
So this prompt, while being quite versatile, also held a lot of mystery, and choosing to ignore it held secrets of its own. While the concept of what-if scenarios aren't new, being popularized all the way back in Budokai 1. While this game also had its own what-if section, choosing to focus on more niche characters like what if Android 8 for Android 16, or what if Devilman fought Frieza in King Cold. But what if scenarios based off the main storyline were somewhat baked into the game due to its mechanics, while the player had access to story triggers based on when certain conditions were met. Each scenario had its own internal logic, not inherently tied to the player. So certain events could trigger if either character's health bar reached a certain level, or if a certain amount of time passed within the battle. So while each scenario was very much designed with a certain path and outcome in mind, the reality is that due to both player and non-player controlled events, there was actually a range of different situations and endings that could happen because of this. And each scenario had its own flowchart of possibilities. Taking the mission Goku's Quiet Rage for instance, it depicts the Z fighters battling Nappa, and the way it's meant to unfold is the following. You begin with Tien, you fight for a bit, and then you get given the prompt option. Pressing this switches you to Chiaotzu. You then fight for a period of time and the prompt comes up again. After pressing it, Chiaotzu self-destructs and then Tien re-tags in. You then fight with Tien until he dies. Then Gohan tags in, you fight for a bit, and then you get the prompt option. By pressing it, Piccolo tags in, gets immediately peppered. A cutscene plays out, and then Gohan tags back in. You fight for a bit, the prompt comes back, and if you press it, Goku tags in. Up until this point, Nappa has really high stats, but Goku is the first character who has higher stats than him, so the player easily defeats Nappa after this point, of which you get your ending.
Vegeta! I don't have use for you anymore.
And this is very much how the game intends for you to win this mission. But if you zoom out, there's actually 5 additional ways for the player to win, of which have their own endings. And there's also 5 additional endings if you lose in a certain way. So while beating Nappa without Goku is quite hard, it's not impossible either, which leads players to explore different situations.
That wasn't even worth the effort.
Re-exploring the Dragonball world was now new again, with interesting altercations like Master Roshi fighting Broly, Goku fighting Deborah, and also many different outcomes like Majin Buu defeating Kid Buu, Trunks successfully preventing Cell from attaining his perfect form, Nail defending Namek, or the many possibilities of Vegeta finally defeating a main enemy.
I've finally become one! I am a legendary Super Saiyan!
Are you sure about that?
It was though more interesting to see his reaction if someone else defeated Frieza.
He just defeated Frieza? Can't be! Has he become a Super Saiyan?
I did it! I beat Frieza!
He beat Frieza even when I, the Prince of all Saiyans, could not! Does this mean I'm inferior to this bald-headed clown?
And for players particularly good at the game, they got the true ending of watching Mr. Satan defeat all the main enemies.
I, Hercule, have defeated Majin Buu! Hey, this is a dream, right?
Yeah, it has to be a dream.
The tournament mode saw a large shift. Even the act of entering one wasn't a given, as only one would be available at any one moment. Perhaps this was to reflect the fact that in the manga, the Tenkaichi Budokai was periodic in nature, and this was very much something that the cast of characters had to wait for. Either way, there was 5 different styles of tournaments this time around, each with their own gimmick. The cell games, you had to carry your health over between each rounds, and the normal one very much had ring outs, with the others having a particular theming around how they chose characters or stages. Winning these tournaments would normally give you money, but in certain occasions it would also give you Dragon Balls. The standard dueling mode, on top of having single and team battles, got the new inclusion of Destruction Point Battle, with all characters being given a set of points, with strong ones having a lot more and less powerful ones having a few. With a limit that you couldn't exceed, this meant that the player just couldn't pick loads of powerful characters, or if you did, you could only have 1 or 2 of them. This forced players to further question who they wanted to play, and maybe try other characters that would have otherwise been glossed over. This mode also further prevented rage quits if you had siblings.
I'll play as a weak character from Dragon Ball. No, I hate playing games with you!
And this time around, the Ultimate Battle mode returned with absolute vengeance, as it now had multiple separate components. The first mode was called Sim Dragon, and it was by far the most novel one. Within this mode, you could choose any character you wanted, and you were given a certain amount of time before a really challenging fight. It was similar to an RPG, having to train and power up your character. This mode was likely inspired by the 10 days of preparation that the Z Fighters had before having to fight Cell, with each character choosing to spend their time differently in order to prepare for the coming conflict. Within this mode, you also had 10 days before a big fight. Within each turn, you got to choose what to do with your day: train, explore, or rest, with health, power stats, money, overall level, and items to manage. And with all of these options, you couldn't inherently do everything well. You can increase your stats through training, but you also lose some health if you do so. If you don't train consistently, your stats will decrease, but if you train too much, you'll just end up damaging yourself and burning out. If you choose to rest, while you'll recover health, you also miss out on the chance of exploring. But if you do explore, you have no idea what you'll find. Maybe you'll find money, maybe you'll be given a chance to train with someone who will boost your stats, maybe you have to complete a minigame.
Magic.
Maybe you'll run into launch and get completely peppered. Or maybe Chi-Chi will be so annoyed at you, she'll force you to study all day, which also somehow drops your health. Maybe you'll find nothing at all, or maybe you'll be given an option that somehow does most of these all at once. Either way, you have to choose, and after 10 turns, you have to fight a really strong enemy. If you manage to defeat your opponent, it unlocks another set of 10 rounds, with each set ending with an even stronger enemy than the last time, so using your days wisely to power up was needed in order to win. At the end of 7 sets, the player was given the chance to try and defeat Super Perfect Cell. So while you could very much go on wacky side adventures like the show's filler, being strong enough to win wasn't a given. And if this wasn't the ultimate battle that players were expecting, there was in fact 100 more, in the second component of Ultimate Battle, Mission 100. Many of these missions had their own themings, like fight anyone with telekinesis, anybody who's old, anybody who has a sword, or anybody who has achieved Super Saiyan 3. There was also some devoid of any real logic. Based on the show, you probably have a few ideas of who this might be, but no. Somehow this, and a robot without a face, constitute as pretty, but there you go. While I suspect some of these were based on bad translations, the premise of killing a bunch of monkeys for millions is not only a very funny meta joke,
Hello, monkeys!
but the idea of players being so baffled that they go on message boards asking as to why they didn't receive a game-breaking amount of money is certainly a meta Ultimate Battle.
Boo!
Each mission had its own constraints that the player had to manage, of which you then received a grade depending on how well you did.
I'll be waiting for you.
Some battles meant that you could only take a certain amount of fighters with you, while others used the destruction point system. This inherently pushed the player to try out other characters during these missions. Quite interestingly, sections of Mission 100 was actually unlocked through SimDragon. If you chose to explore and you ran into Bulma, you're given the option to give her money for a new invention. And if you do so, she unlocks other parts of the game for you. It's truly a meteoric idea. And the last set of battles were quite challenging, normally fighting against just one character that was insanely strong. With the 100th mission of trying to beat the legendary Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, which some would argue was an ultimate battle. If that wasn't ultimate enough for the player, there was a third component in its survival mode, unlocking after completing parts of Mission 100. In this mode, the player was given a challenge of fighting 50 enemies back to back. After each enemy is defeated, a new one tags in straight away, with the player restoring some health, and the 50th opponent is normally very powerful. There were 3 flavors to survival mode: the Bardock War, fighting many characters that are part of the Frieza Force, starting with some low-level soldiers all the way up to the Ginyu Force, which ultimately ended with the Emperor himself. The next one was Dragon Classic. Within this rendition, you battle against early Dragon Ball characters in Penguin Village, and being as how these characters aren't as powerful, with some of them not even being able to fly properly, you'd think it would be easy, but for some reason, this one ends in fighting Arale. And while she only cameoed in Dragon Ball and is really from Dr. Slump, channeling her gag manga roots, for some reason the devs thought it would be really funny if she was Shin Akuma levels of hard to defeat. And the last flavor is very much All-Star. No, not that one. And within this one, it took all of the strongest characters within the series, and the final opponent is Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta. With the All-Star mission being so hard, you could view it as the ultimate battle. But if it was somehow not ultimate enough for players, exclusive to PlayStation 2 owners, they got a 4th component called Disc Fusion. If the player owned one of the first 2 installments, Disc Fusion would unlock their respective ultimate battles within the 3rd one. So if the player fancied battling 100 opponents to be crowned number 1 again, or reconquer all those classic towers, you now could with the new characters and gameplay of this one. So with 3 new additions plus fusing the 2 of the past, this mode truly was the most ultimate battle possible. And with so much of its content unlocking over time dependent on other modes and player progress, it's quite clear that the devs wanted people to play this for a very long time. Interestingly, quite a lot of work went into the Nintendo Wii version of this game, and for some reason it does appear that the developers put more efforts into perfecting this version. While attempting to find an accurate figure for both the Wii and PlayStation 2 sales for its previous game, the choice of investing in the Wii version of this game was probably linked to those figures. Either way, motion controls have been completely reworked since the second game. This was due to the fact that Tenkaichi 2 did receive some criticisms for how hard the motions were to do at times, particularly in a game with fast-paced combat.
We made a lot of improvements on the Wii controls because in the previous game we had a pointing device set top of the TV, so the player used to see cursor is moving in the screen. Instead we are using a motion sensor.
Now, a lot of special moves were done in a simpler manner, and it was much easier to perform them with one motion instead of multiple. Within Tenkaichi 2, a Kamehameha was done by having the cursor pointed at the screen, holding 2 buttons down and then gesturing back and forth, all while retaining that cursor on the TV. While in Tenkaichi 3, all you had to do was hold 2 buttons down and do one gesture.
I charge up and I just bring it down.
And considering that Tenkaichi 2 had some moves that required 3 separate gestures, going from that to just one and not needing to point a cursor anywhere certainly made this a lot faster. And even if the player wasn't happy with all of that, they still had multiple ways to control the game. But the largest feature that the Wii game had was the inclusion of Dragonnet Battle.
The most exciting feature will be the online battle system via Wi-Fi on the Wii version.
While Wii players didn't get access to Disc Fusion mode due to only the PS2 having both predecessors on its console. The online mode was more than enough to make up for that. Within it was a variety of battle types. I should note that there were some knocks against this feature due to lag and the amount of available players online, but overall this was a really great inclusion. But one of the best features in this game by far was one done on complete accident.
And may God have mercy on us all.
In the last two games, there was purely some character illustrations to show off the models, which eventually evolved into a mini encyclopedia. But for this game, while still having all of those options, in order to spice it up, they decided to bring in the energy of an aunt who just roasts people at the family gathering.
Yamcha, oh, he was a good for nothing to begin with. Oh, there's Tian's little friend. He hasn't gotten any taller. This is the form of Vegeta when he first became a delinquent. Well, he was a delinquent in the first place. It looks like he's different from your average delinquent. Two delinquents merge and become the biggest delinquent. This is the awful soup Bulma made for my son to make him look like a dork. Even I didn't expect him to be such a polite, nice boy. Even such a polite boy can become a delinquent. His face is ferocious.
You what?
Hate to think what his parents look like.
Already dead.
That one is kind of froggy. It looks like he has bad breath. His face is like a marshmallow. He looks kind of weak. He's Frieza's underling too. It looks like even I could beat him.
Put some respect on my name.
Such a disgusting animal.
How could you avoid being peppered like this? Avoiding being roasted by the woman who even scares Goku was still impossible. The player still had the choice of powering themselves up and being good at the game. Character balancing and overall movesets did get a bit of a tweak from the last game. Taking a character like Gogeta for instance, in the second game he had 3 moves, all of which were projectile related, whereas in the third game he had an area of effect move, a rush move, and a projectile move. The game's balance shifted to give most characters most tools. While this does remove some of the unique aspects to certain characters from the second game, overall it does make this game a bit more fair to play. This game also marks a really large shift in how the developers wanted people to play it. Finding and maintaining lock-on to your opponent is no longer an element that the developers wanted players to manage. Both characters begin each fight locked onto each other, and the mini-map from before is no longer there. And while in the previous games your lock-on button could toggle view on and off, now it no longer really does anything. There is a few occasions where you can still lose sight of your opponent, particularly if you get hit with an ultimate, but your character automatically looks for their opponent without you pressing anything. While the manual does state that there is a lock-on button, it doesn't do a lot in pretty much every situation, and even the tutorial which touches on this subject just basically tells you to not worry about it as it auto-fixes itself. And with the removal of the map feature, the focus of exploring the battlefield is sort of no longer there. While in the first 2 games you could very much find Dragon Balls, and in the second even find battle items, now any and all items were removed. Even Dragon Balls no longer spawned, and in place of the old mechanic, even if you broke a part of the stage and a Dragon Ball was supposed to be in it, now it would just appear at the top of your HUD indicating you've collected it, which is definitely odd considering the Dragon Balls are modeled in this game. Perhaps all of this was done to just make it more similar to a fighting game. The options the player had for both movement, offense and defense did change within itself. While there were new inclusions, there was also just general shifts to how things work. So while there was new rushing techniques that came with its own unique follow-up, the way that some old rushing techniques work did change. Lift strike and ground slash changed to be universal so that every character could do one. Rushing techniques like the rolling hammer was now dedicated within a set rather than being a unique button combination. And this game introduced the idea that some moves could have multiple follow-ups and not just one. And many of these additional follow-ups either acted like mix-ups or created new ways for you to open up your opponent. And many of the rushing techniques that didn't have follow-ups in the last game all got ones in this game. There was also some new aerial follow-ups and new ways to close the distance. and the format of some super moves changed from being just a normal rush to now being an unblockable attack that could close the distance really fast. There was now a new clash type in its teleport battle, and within its killer feature of sparking, players had access to even more flashier combo finishes. Building off all of the additional follow-up combos, the character could now finish with a fast special move. This was one of the first Dragon Ball games to incorporate one of the most integral parts of the anime's fight scenes, the sonic sway. And while the previous installment did look good for the 6th generation of consoles, this one appeared to be even more polished than that. The VFX for special moves were more dynamic and wide-ranging, and many of the battle animations for characters were now more novel, with characters looking like they fight differently, even if the moves were similar. And there was now custom animations for many of the transformations within the game. For the competitive players, some of the most advanced mechanics did change quite a lot from the sequel. While its second installment added a lot of depth to the overall combat system, its third one didn't just add, but it also chose to change and omit. Perhaps the sheer amount of content added forced the devs to rethink what they wanted to add this time around. Oddly, they chose to remove charge cancels within the game. A range of counters were removed and replaced with a new one. The 5-way directional guarding had mostly been removed, with the default block being more encompassing. And the properties to some existing moves changed. Some attacks no longer knocked down the opponent. You couldn't reuse the same smash type within a combo, and many of the other smaller changes altogether did change the overall gameplay feel. While the game did remove some of the advanced strategies of the old game, it did receive some new ones, and of course the inclusion of the legendary Z counter and all of the teleport battles that could happen because of it. While its combat system wasn't universally regarded as a pure upgrade among advanced players, it still though had a lot of depth. For the average player, most noted a significant shift in its evolution system, which had changed a lot from the last 2 games. Beforehand, the overall strategy for upgrading a character was equipping items with the largest stat boost possible, with some ability type items enhancing your playstyle. But in Tenkaichi 3, upgrading a character was in 2 parts. Firstly, you had to actively increase a character's ability limits with Z points, which further made boosting a character its own journey. And the second part is how you chose to use your character's ability points. With a maximum of 7 points to spend and each skill having its own value, this forced the player to really question what aspect they wanted to boost. The support type items from the last 2 games became skill types in this one, of which also increased in number and versatility. The inclusion of skills that buffed certain aspects but debuffed others for a lower point value created more interesting matchups in that your character had its own strengths and vulnerabilities. While the overall point value is much lower, it stopped the meta of just finding plus 20 stat items and calling it a day. This forced the player to think a bit harder on how they wanted to use a character. You could give certain characters the ability to fly, change the color of your aura, auto heal you over time, half the amount of ki needed to do super moves, reduce the amount of damage you take while blocking, and like the ability types, there was also debuffs to certain skills, so you could really boost the amount of damage a throw does, but it makes your energy based special moves a lot less effective. Or begin a battle with your blast stocks all maxed out, but once you use them, your gauge fills out a lot slower. And these items within themselves could also have multiple benefits within just one, and some of them could only be applied to a character if they were good or evil. And there were some items that only worked if the character was on a certain planet or if they were in water. And due to the fact that characters by nature had their own pros and cons, the player could get the most out of a character by paying attention to their nuances. Vegeta by default was designed with really great super moves and ki blasts, so further building on this by reducing the cost of his supers, increasing charging speed, and amping the damage for both made him really effective in battle. So if you chose to buff him like this, while there would definitely be a knock on the amount of health he has or how much his rush attacks do or how much defense he has, overall you would see a massive increase in how useful this character is. Whereas a character like Tien on the other hand had really great rush moves, so boosting his attack and combo opportunities at the cost of anything else was certainly worth it. Piccolo had really great defense, so giving him guarding without any damage taken and more teleports, on top of an amped defense stat, made him a tank. So while all these characters certainly had trade-offs, because you had the options of multiple loadouts, you could get to play the same character in many different ways. And once you layer in the fact that you could add CPU logic to make a character play in a certain way, you could have quite a lot of interesting battles. You could also just mess with the AI. You could give a character a Vegeta type fighting pattern where they prioritize energy blasts from far away, but then apply it to a character like Videl, who doesn't have any ranged attacks.
It's evil. It's diabolical.
And if you really did just want to unlock a stupidly overpowered character, there was a way for you to do that. In all of the Tenkaichi games, there was a password input feature which unlocked a version of a character that was very high level. But the way it worked in Tenkaichi 3 is that it unlocked a red Potara version of your character. While normally there was ability, skill, and strategy type items, but red Potara items were a fourth type that weren't normally attainable. So not only did your password character completely ignore the item limit, but red Potara items themselves were completely ridiculous on what they enabled your character to do in both stats and just raw skills. So you can finally live out the fantasy of having Wolfgang defeat all the big bads in Dragon Ball Z.
I've had just about enough of you. Put 'em up.
Run, everybody, run! Monster!
Okay.
Destroy.
Yamcha, oh, he was a good for nothing to begin with.
Check out my extra large spirit ball. Hey, who's the man?
And who couldn't forget its most memorable feature, its character roster. This legendary set of characters would be the ultimate comparison for any Dragon Ball game that came out in the future. It introduced the infamous Goku Mid and Vegeta second form, whatever that means, and completely tertiary characters that no one would ever ask for. While there were certainly repeats in this game, characters for the most part did have different special moves, and for players at an advanced level, these characters played quite differently from each other with all of their nuances, and there was also some characters that were non-playable but came in to assist in certain moves. The only other Dragon Ball game that had such a massive roster was Xenoverse 2, and that was only attainable through a lot of DLC packs.
You what?
Give me your money!
So for a base game to have this many characters, transformations, and additional costumes meant that the player could definitely pick their favorite characters and get to utilize them. Feeling like you were in the Dragon Ball world didn't just stop there though. The amount of places you could visit and details within the game certainly added to the overall experience. Some of the stages had differing times of day you could enter them in, and while this was mostly aesthetic, there was a few gameplay implications because of it. Some characters could only transform during a full moon. So if you played on a stage during the day and your character wasn't a brilliant scientist, they couldn't really use their grade 8 form. Not only was time of day quite interesting, but the variations of places you could fight was quite fun too. You could fight in deserts, glaciers, tournament arenas, ruined cities, cities about to be ruined, heavenly realms, the depths of hell, many alien planets, including some at differing levels of imminent explosion. And you can even fight in the
one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
So with all the new content that these new modes bring, and the largest selection of characters of any Dragon Ball game on the market, fans were left with a final installment that would certainly have a lot of replay value. The reviews for both the PlayStation 2 and Nintendo Wii version were mostly average that had a positive leaning. While most yearly Dragon Ball games tended to not reach high praise, the Tenkaichi series as a whole did maintain a slightly above average rating compared to most other titles. Due to this game not having a substantial facelift in either the graphics or combat department in relation to the second installment, some did question how much of an upgrade this game was. While its Ultimate Battle had a really large amount of new content added to it, due to the fact that only one version had online and its story mode, while being dynamic, it wasn't the 60-hour adventure compared to its predecessor. These together left some feeling like the game was a bit too similar to its previous installment. So while the critical reception maybe wasn't as high as Rio and the team were hoping for, due to the climate of video games at the time, this installment ended up resonating even more with fans. With the 7th generation of consoles now being in full swing in the year of 2007, Sony, Nintendo and Microsoft all had their premier consoles now launched, and attention was starting to shift as to what games could be on newer hardware. But oddly, due to this new generation being quite expensive, particularly the PlayStation 3,
$599 US.
No! You'll never get a cent out of me! Never!
this somewhat forced some fans to stick to the previous generation a bit longer, or at least until the price dropped. And for the segment who were Dragon Ball fans that couldn't quite afford a new console, Tenkaichi 3 ended up being a game of choice, due to it being a really late installment to the 6th generation, and it being a content-rich 3rd installment, and with a wide offering, particularly a roster that you couldn't play anywhere else. This game certainly helped tie some fans over until they could afford a new console. And perhaps it was a coincidence, but the commercials alluded to the idea that many would keep playing this game long after launch.
Yes! Wanna go again? There we go. Another one? Again? Keep playing? One more? Another one? Yes! Wanna go again? Yeah!
Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3 had over 150 playable characters. How long will you play?
Wanna go again? Huh? What?
Choosing to play this game again might have only been seen as a temporary option for a short period, particularly due to the fact that new Dragon Ball games were still coming out every year. With the rise of many online platforms which involved messaging and sharing content, and growing video sharing platforms like YouTube at the time, many viewers would very much be exposed to people playing this game all over again.
Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3, it's time!
It's been a minute! It's a classic though, Tenkaichi. It's a classic!
Greetings folks, welcome to Let's Play Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3, the best anime game I think has ever been developed by man. Let's rock and roll!
Oh, here's the music. Oh, I love that song so much. This song is the most hype song you could ever have for the intro of a game.
I've been playing a lot of Dragon Ball Z Tenkaichi 3.
Rhymes out here today, I'm finally playing some Tenkaichi 3. The 3 idiots are back!
Hundreds of channels even till this day play this game to a large audience, or even choose to stream it on Twitch. Its nature of being a game that's quite easy to pick up and jump right in did make it quite entertaining to watch. And with Dragon Ball's worldwide appeal, it meant that many gamers from different areas chose to play this game in different ways, despite the fact that the sparking titles clearly are unbalanced by nature. You wouldn't initially think it would attract a competitive scene similar to other fighting games, but I guess if others can be popular even when most of the cast are utterly broken, there's spectacle and iconic characters present. If that can resonate with the player base, so can this one. While the scene is somewhat only present in small circles, there are multiple communities that play Budokai Tenkaichi 3 quite competitively, with tournaments that even have cash prizes. Mostly being divided up by either country or what language is spoken, there are many Discords and YouTube channels documenting high-level matches. The novel factors of Budokai Tenkaichi 3 and the finer nuances of the engine and character builds, this together did allow for advanced tech and new exploits and strategies to be discovered, even till this day. With characters being quite different at high level play and tech being discovered over time, it has led to tier lists changing over the years. With so many characters and a high skill ceiling, it has led to the fact that different players can choose the same character and play them very differently in matches, of which all become entertaining within themselves. One of the most significant factors contributing to this game's legacy, for better or for worse, is the mods. While other games within the franchise have seen their share of mods, none have matched the scale, variety, and community engagement that the Sparking series did. The sheer volume of available mods in many ways transformed the game into a platform for user-generated content, a shift likely never intended by the original developers. With this not being confined to one region and the modding scene very much being all around the globe, many chose to contribute unique ideas and styles for how they see this franchise. Altogether, this has almost allowed the game to evolve all on its own. The purpose of many of these mods themselves can be split into a few different categories. Functional, like adding new graphical content or fixing bugs or improving performance. Restoration, like making hidden or cut content playable. Repurposing, like taking files from another game to make new content within this one. Cheat codes, adding more stats to characters or making them unbeatable. Expansive, like adding canon characters, extra costumes, or special moves. Cringe but cool, like adding early 2000s fanfiction or having custom attacks. Shitposts, that transcend the boundaries of intellectual property, religions, nationalities, or critical thinking.
You what?
The realms of how wide the Dragon Ball story reached in the world reflected back within a game like this in the form of mods. From adding back in old school anime soundtracks or adding in Linkin Park, this game in particular allowed fans to make the Dragon Ball world how they see it, with many communities from different areas of the world all creating their own mods within relation to their own cultural lens of how they view the franchise. It's almost created a wave of entertainment within itself.
Is that Billie Eilish? Yes! Billie Eilish!
Hold on.
Just the Penguin? Do you have any idea how good this guy is with prep time?
What the barnacle is going on here?
With the modding likely starting off as something that was initially funny, with the demand and entertainment value it was bringing back into the community, the effort shifted to eventually evolving into crafting soft sequels. The fan-generated sequel of Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 4 was created by some of the most passionate and dedicated modders. While most mods did lean into branching out into other IPs or edgy Dragon Ball fanfiction, this one in particular was quite different. This mod attempted to look at what the Dragon Ball franchise was evolving into and reflect it back into this game. While many characters and stages could either be tweaked to reflect some of the changes in the series, others on the other hand had to be created from the ground up each time. Through reformatting other modes and adding more content in certain areas, it did feel like a soft continuation that, while not created by Spike, certainly felt like it kept the game's spirit alive. The aesthetic layer in particular added a lot of fan service to the game, adding new costumes and characters, changing special moves, and overall making it a great Dragon Ball toy box. And the team didn't just stop there though. The story mode was remade from the ground up, reflecting the new series. Opting to redesign the flow of each mission and ripping out the audio from the anime, coupled with all the new characters, it actually felt like a near official DLC expansion. So while this mod in particular is certainly one of the best ones, the modding community as a whole have kept the game's spirit alive. While many forums and social media platforms tend to view older games through a nostalgic lens, not many games from multiple generations back are played like this now, with an active competitive scene still playing tournaments and discovering new tech, a very active modding community revitalizing the game and expanding it, and of course many streamers and YouTubers choosing to play this game each month to hundreds of thousands of people. It might be strange to see such a strong presence for an old game despite many new entries into the Dragon Ball gaming landscape on newer generations and with higher budgets. You might be thinking, what is making players return to this one?
Let's fight.
Rated T for teen.
The yearning for this game to return never quite went away for some fans. While the Sparking series did receive spin-offs in the form of Tenkaichi Tag Team and a spiritual successor in the form of the Raging Blast series, none of these quite lived up to the tall order of Budokai Tenkaichi 3. Despite clear improvements in the graphics department, new twists on the gameplay formula, or in general new features or new gaming modes for the player to experience. These somewhat failed to hit the itch that Tenkaichi 3 scratched. While this might seem rather pedantic, particularly to someone who isn't either a gamer or a fan of the Dragon Ball IP, by looking at some of the follow-up games and comparing them back to Tenkaichi 3, it becomes a bit more apparent what was lost. Tenkaichi 3's legendary roster has been shrunk quite significantly. Some of the iconic special moves almost look tamer in some of the new games, and despite more powerful new generation hardware, some of the presentation doesn't exactly make it look like an upgrade, but more so just different choices regarding art and animation style. And while mostly similar, the combat speed almost looks faster and more dynamic compared to its newer installment. While it would be unfair to state that some of the newer games didn't have the effort put into them that the older ones did, particularly being how newer generation of games require more effort to make than the older ones. But by further looking at what made Tenkaichi 3 resonate with so many people, in some areas the newer generations did feel like a step back. And while Spike would go on to keep trying new ways to spice up their next game, like featuring new OVAs, characters that have never been playable before, or just general shake-ups to the gameplay, but year after year, none of these new games ever quite hit the bar that Tenkaichi 3 set. The total lifetime sales of the third installment was over 3 million units, and while the number fluctuates, it would still make it one of the best performing Dragon Ball games on the 6th generation. And once you compare that figure to any of the sales of anything that followed it up from Spike, it's quite apparent that something was missing. And while they would eventually return to make a game that used the Budokai Tenkaichi label, let's just say it drew further appreciation for its older installment. And with this rather disappointing entry into Spike's line of Dragon Ball games, a decision was made for them to step away of being an active developer for mainline Dragon Ball games. While Spike would later go on to merge with Churnsoft, and under this new company, they still would continue to make games based on anime franchises. They never really entertained working with the Dragon Ball franchise again, while many years later they would create the J-Star series, which included many popular anime franchises, with some Dragon Ball characters being included. This would be the only remit of how they interacted with the franchise. And as time went on, with more and more games being launched, the chances of this company returning to the Sparking series and making a new real installment seemed less and less likely. All series have to come to an end at some point, and maybe the Sparking titles could stay a great memory from an older generation of games. And with all of the communities built around it, reliving these titles wasn't exactly hard to do. So perhaps the healthy thing would be to focus on future games from other developers. But if you know anything about Dragon Ball fans, choosing to either give up or channel any real form of critical thinking isn't something that they're known for. Seeing an old gaming franchise return after years of radio silence is not only rare, but attempting to resurrect the series externally through community support is even rarer. And for the state of the Dragon Ball landscape, this would certainly be a journey, with many games being made by other developers, some of which were performing immensely well. But for the team behind the old series, not only have they had little touch points with the franchise, and likely the business relationships with the publisher relevant for the Dragon Ball IP probably haven't been maintained. And internally, because of a corporate merger and a lot of general time passing, the team who originally worked on the series, most of them might not even be at the company anymore. So with the landscape looking like this, successful games from other developers, and a series by an old studio that likely have changed a lot and had a track record that fizzled out commercially, what can fans really do to completely change the situation? The squeaky wheel gets the oil, so if publishers aren't aware that players want something, how can anything really happen? In order to get through to Bandai Namco, Dragon Ball fans tried a number of different avenues, asking for a follow-up on many of Bandai's public channels, signing petitions, creating YouTube videos, creating posts on many social media websites and forums, and commenting on anything Dragon Ball related from Bandai, and many other ways of generating excitement were attempted, but to no avail. If Bandai didn't want to make this game, seeing it be modded into existence by fans would surely be a kick up the backside, particularly if the follow-up gets a lot of downloads and attention online. And this would also be a free look as to what fans would expect from a Tenkaichi 4 and then would actually play it. But unfortunately, this would also be to no avail. If pushing for a follow-up was maybe too direct, just showing that a player base really likes an old gaming series might also make something happen. Fans continued to make new content about older games, telling Bandai how good their older entries were on public channels, ranking the game rather highly on community-driven popularity polls, and of course continue to be part of online communities surrounding the game. But similar to Vegeta trying to defeat a main enemy, this was also to no avail. If being nice wasn't working, showing that a publisher could be losing money might lead to a slap in the face from shareholders. If players are pirating something that you own, it not only shows that you have a game that people like, but it could mean that something is blocking them from wanting to pay for it. An inflated price, lots of microtransactions. While there's a long list of potential reasons, for the Tenkaichi series, it was just the ability to even buy it. None of the Tenkaichi games could be bought digitally through any online store, and with these games being now part of a very old generation, the only way of playing them is to go out and buy a PlayStation 2 or Nintendo Wii. But even then, trying to find a physical copy from a second-hand store could prove to be quite challenging, being as how this series was going up in price over the years. With paying for it legally being such an ordeal and borderline impossible depending on what part of the world you were in, and even if you did, you were still somewhat disconnected from the online community who were playing this game online and installing mods. This pushed players to pirate the game at scale, and even though Bandai lost out on some potential revenue, it still didn't really push them to make any real decision or even acknowledge the situation. With all attempts failing at this point, fans would maybe have to be slightly more strategic if they wanted to see a follow-up happen. Publishers tend to not return to old series, particularly if they can't prove any buyer confidence. While many people claim to want something online, the relative amount who would actually go out and pay for it can be a very sobering experience. So how do you fix this chicken and egg situation? Some old series have made a successful comeback years after radio silence, but how so? Did enough players prove that the money was there? Or did a publisher take a risk? The answer is not really either. Instead of making a brand new installment, publishers can choose to re-release an old game to see how it performs. The amount of work needed to port an old game onto newer hardware is orders of magnitude less time and money for a developer, particularly compared to creating a brand new installment on a current generation. So from a publisher's point of view, you can very quickly and cheaply prove if that fan base is really there and would go out and pay for that old series again. With far more real information around player engagement and profit margins, publishers can now better gauge risk, of which greenlighting a modern follow-up can become a real option again. So for Dragon Ball fans, pushing for a HD remaster was certainly the way to go, and considering that the Budokai series itself did receive a HD collection 10 years after its first installment, if fans could drum up enough hype for a Tenkaichi collection, it's likely that it would perform well, with a community still playing the third installment. If there was a remaster with online functionality, it would certainly prove that the audience is there. So while Dragon Ball fans went back online, created and signed a number of petitions, and made a lot of noise on public channels, Bandai chose to remain silent.
Come on now, dawg. Come on, man.
While the lack of acknowledgement was certainly frustrating, especially as every effort up until this point seemed to fall short of gaining any real traction. But Dragon Ball fans still had one last play they could make. It would certainly grab Bandai's attention, it would be bold, and it involved going right to the source.
So Thundershot and I went to San Francisco for the Bandai Namco PR event where we got to play a bunch of awesome games. And while we were there, we actually met with one of the guys who's in charge of IPs for Bandai Namco. Meaning, this is the person that kind of goes back to Japan and decides, we should do a Dragon Ball Z game. We should do a Naruto game. We had about, 5 minutes to pitch him an idea. We told him the community wants Dragon Ball Z Tenkaichi 3 HD. And the guy said, you know what? That sounds like a good idea. For them to actually put that kind of work in, they said that they have to sell at least 100,000 copies. And I was like, are you serious? The game sold like 3 million copies. I'm sure you can do 100,000 copies across all the platforms, basically just to get the evidence. So essentially, if this video gets, a lot of comments, a lot of likes, a lot of interaction, we can go back to him and be like, hey, look, we made a video about this and the community is pretty excited. Is this enough to trigger your team to give us this game?
Dragon Ball fans found themselves closer than ever to the possibility of a HD re-release. Despite being fueled by strong numbers and a surge of excitement from the community, what was to follow was a baffling period of radio silence.
On what is going down with Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3 HD remake that we were talking about before. The guy that we talked to, he's that guy. He's the guy who kind of transfers like what North America wants to see. And we were like, yeah, Budokai Tenkaichi 3 is easily the most popular Dragon Ball Z game ever made. So he was going to go over to Japan, and he wasn't supposed to be gone very long. He was supposed to be gone like a week or two, and then come back and then tell us if Japan gave us the yay or nay on it after hearing our feedback from our videos. And then he went to Japan, he never came back.
He never came back. I've been asking my contact at Bandai Namco US for the last month and a half. I'm like, hey, is there an update? Is there an update? And then the other day I got an answer that was just like, yeah, his desk just has cobwebs. He's just been gone that long.
And with that, the last real hope for this series returning was gone. While there were occasional sparks of hope, either through cryptic game listings, expansions on backwards compatibility, or just general rumors, but none ever materialized into anything concrete with the series returning. With all efforts failing and no cards left to play, fans were left with the reality that this series wasn't coming back.
I'm ready, depression. I'm ready, depression.
With the situation being this dire, the only way the Tenkaichi series could ever make a comeback was if the entire Dragon Ball franchise underwent a full-scale revitalization. A moonshot like this wasn't really attainable by fans, with a story that had concluded decades prior, and a global fanbase whose excitement, while vast, was not infinite. The key to the revival rested on one individual, Akira Toriyama, the series' legendary creator. After 20 years of writing and drawing manga with little rest, he had now retired. His contributions in the years that followed were mostly limited to brief one-off stories or character designs for various projects. With his famously forgetful nature, coupled with his general reluctance to revisit the past, made a full return completely unlikely. Despite clear commercial incentives and a passionate fanbase clamoring for more, it was never enough to lure Toriyama back. Not even a wish to Shenron could summon him back to the helm. Perhaps it would take something more potent, a twisted monkey's paw type wish. Maybe a dark miracle like that could make it happen. For Tenkaichi fans, many of whom had abandoned hope entirely by this point, for better or for worse, an event like that would emerge that would completely evolve the franchise. Twentieth Century Fox acquired the license to create a Dragon Ball live-action film. Bringing Toriyama on board as a creative consultant should have helped steer the production in order to be something that would resonate with fans. However, they chose to disregard nearly all of his feedback, sidelining the very creator of the franchise.
Everyone is stupid except me.
For Toriyama, the experience was not only upsetting, but culturally stinging. Coming from a part of the world where tenure and seniority command deep respect, especially over something you've built with your own hands, this was far more cutting than Hollywood likely realized. Adding further insult to injury, the film was a spectacular failure, both critically and financially. While this Hollywood film failed to resonate with general audiences or reawaken interest into the franchise, it was, though, something more important. It sparked Toriyama's passion for his series. He would later go on to say, "Just as I thought, the result was a movie I cannot call Dragon Ball." But what would be a film worthy of that title? Several years later, Toriyama answered that question himself by crafting the script and character designs for a brand new film, Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods. Unlike the prior anime films for Dragon Ball, which Toriyama considered to be within a separate continuity due to him having very little involvement in them, this project, however, had its full focus. And while fans were thrilled and certainly noticed, the bigger question loomed: would this effort truly revitalize the Dragon Ball franchise? Yes. Yes, it did. Battle of Gods ignited a wave of new success for the franchise. This paved the way for new theatrical films, a brand new weekly anime series, a flood of merchandise, and significantly higher profits for both Toei Animation and Bandai Namco, with even some years Dragon Ball being a major driver of corporate earnings. With this renewed excitement and financial success led to greater investment. The creation of the Dragon Ball Room, a dedicated division focused solely on the series, ensured that higher quality products would be developed. This shift also allowed for bigger, more ambitious video games with much longer development cycles. The overall franchise's gaming experiences expanded in scale, prompting Bandai to collaborate with studios that had never even worked on Dragon Ball before.
Dude, oh my god. Arc System, I love you. Right. Thank you, Bandai Namco.
And for what was about to happen next, no one really knows where the spark came from. Maybe it was the popularity of the gaming channels, the creativity of the modding community, the unyielding nostalgia of fans, the competitive fighting game scene, continued piracy, Mexico, or a little of everything. Either way, after 16 years, fans of the old school were finally rewarded.
Beautiful time to be alive. I'm gonna pass out. I'm gonna pass out.
This is just not common for Namco Bandai to even think about, like, yo, the fans are asking for that.
I could dead ass cry.
We won. Y'all remember like 8 years ago when the Tenkaichi series would come back?
You know how long? You know how long? It's been a long winter.
Like, nobody could have predicted this at all.
Oh my god, it's real!
I used to pray for times like this.
The announcement of Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 4 ignited an unparalleled wave of excitement within the anime gaming community. This event saw the game trending #1 on Twitter in multiple regions worldwide, and this would only be the beginning of the game's success, selling 3 million copies on its first day, and even more remarkably, every edition of the game outperformed pre-orders for a mainline Call of Duty game. It's completely unheard of for an anime arena fighter to do numbers like that. For a game series to make a return like this, while also being heavily compared to a PlayStation 2 title, this was a testament to the team behind the original trilogy that they achieved something that deeply resonated with the fanbase that was so excited to see its return decades later. Not every development team can craft a game that not only builds thriving communities, but also turn a segment of gamers into lifelong fans of the source material. Game development is inherently challenging, and working with a popular intellectual property like Dragon Ball adds even more layers of complexity than normal. Studios must navigate the expectations of rights holders, stay true to the source material, exceed fan expectations, develop compelling gameplay, all within typically tighter deadlines than normal. Striking the right balance is not easy. The Dragon Ball IP is a cornerstone of Namco Bandai, and they create a vast array of merchandise, games, and digital experiences. These range in quality greatly, with the plethora of different content centered around this franchise. Very few of these projects actually resonate positively with Dragon Ball fans.
Dragon Ball Z Connect is exactly what you would expect it to be. A 2! A 2 out of 10! This shit is garbage!
Even today, the original trilogy continues to inspire and entertain players. Hidden details and Easter eggs are still being uncovered, and there's very much evidence of cut content that fuels a lot of curiosity for dedicated players. Its first installment clearly had mechanics meant to further use the battle arenas. Within the second installment, there was a range of unused Z items, with Sensu Beans in particular unlocking the ability to continue. This would further make its story mode even closer to an RPG. And for its third installment, there was a lot of evidence that there was meant to be more combo finishes, special move variations, and even more Z items for the player to unlock. And despite all the new things to do in that game, some modes might have been even larger. The Mission 100 component to Ultimate Battle had an additional 30 levels hidden away, and by hacking the game, some of them are even playable. With each project, it was clear that the development team was committed to delivering a massive roster each time, often exceeding their own ambitious promises to Bandai. For its third installment, the game was marketed with having a roster of over 150 characters, but the final count was actually over 160. With each new entry, the team at Spike showed clear commitment to innovating, introducing new mechanics and refining gameplay. The evolution from its first installment to the third was quite striking. The depth and complexity to its combat system was practically night and day. Even entries released just a year apart from each other managed to elicit very different reactions from the player base. It's quite rare for a series to have one installment captivate speedrunners, while its next installment spawn its own dedicated competitive fighting game scene. While doing the initial research for this video, it became clear quite early on that what makes Dragon Ball games special isn't the publisher, it's the game studios behind them. For the original Dragon Ball Z Budokai game, Uchiyama at the time would later go on to comment how challenging the development process could be. Working with the relevant supervisors and going through the licensing process could be really hard. Uchiyama noted that an early version of Budokai was completely rejected by the license holder, and they had to stop production, and the team at DIMPS had to work day and night in order to revise the game, which even involved completely rebuilding it from scratch. They did all of this to eventually get the thumbs up from the relevant supervisors, and while I'm sure the licensing process is there for a reason, and it's executed by people that are just doing their job, it's still up to the game development studio to take all the feedback on board and really do something with it. Luckily for the team at DIMPS, their hard work would pay off as they made the first truly well-received Dragon Ball game, and it would go on to sell over 3 million units, and it forever changed the landscape of what fans expect from Dragon Ball Z games. For the challenging situation that DIMPS was put in, they chose to double down, work around the clock, and do something special, and not all game development studios would have made a choice like that. Some would have opted to play it incredibly safe, so those who choose to innovate and see it through to the end are certainly worth remembering. Daisuke and the team at DIMPS have definitely earned that. The question remains, does Ryo and the team at Spike deserve the same? Unlike Dimps, Ryo's team did not face the same legal challenges or pressure of setting the standard for what a great Dragon Ball game should be. Yet their journey was no less significant. Ryo inherited the mantle of series producer at not exactly the most easiest time period. Fans had already received what they considered a very fitting send-off to a beloved gaming series that really utilized the Dragon Ball world. The Dragon Ball story itself was considered over, with the manga and anime being concluded years prior. With Toriyama being retired at this stage, any meaningful collaboration was completely off the cards. Additionally, with new console generations on the horizon, Ryo had to navigate the challenges of delivering standout games at the end of an era while preparing for what the industry's next leap forward was. And for Ryo personally, this was an opportunity handed to him by his senior, Daisuke, and he had yet to prove that he was truly worthy of the title, series producer. The easy choice would have been to play it safe. Instead, he chose the opposite, crafting an ambitious vision of elevating the series with spectacular 3D battles, with a focus on combat, motion, and environment exploration. Perhaps his time working under his senior had helped instill the mantra, create the first from scratch, evolve the second, and complete the series by the third. Ryo chose to seek out a development team that helped him take the franchise into uncharted territory. The hard-working team at Spike helped to deliver on interesting innovations for the series, choosing to blend fighting game mechanics with arcade-style shooters, create the first Dragon Ball game to utilize motion controls, popularize the concept of having a very large roster of characters, and choosing to further expand and refine gameplay with each installment, and also introduce new modes and features. And Ryo went out of his way to try and bring in the anime OST or create something novel. While the success of any game involves effort and talent, there is often an element of luck involved. For the Sparking series, it seemed that the people behind it genuinely loved Dragon Ball.
The amount of characters is just, it's amazing. I've never seen a game with that many characters in my entire life.
Dragon Ball Z, GT, and the movies.
We also have one of my personal favorites. We have the Arazu form. When the moonlight hits them, they turn into this giant gorilla.
Most important thing is that we keep entertaining the hardcore DBZ fans around the world.
With the controller, and it'll make the Kamehameha come out, or the Spirit Bomb, or special beam cannon.
Completely new feature that we have added to Budokai Tenkaichi 3.
Whether it was passion, work ethic, or luck, or maybe a bit of everything, the Sparking series was truly something special. And its third installment is still being played today, decades after launch. This series left an undeniable mark, becoming a platform for entertainment, modding, and fighting game communities. For its publishers, it was always a top performer and even broke the curse of declining sales. And for fans, there was certainly a lot of fun to be had within a game with so much dedication to its source material. While Bandai frequently create Dragon Ball games, now and again a team will decide to go all out and craft something fueled by passion. And for the Sparking series, this was a story worth remembering.